Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the MHA What If, with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Deku believed he was truly useless. All credits for this video go to their respective authors, so please support the real author. Check out the link in the description for more details. Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Hello all, I thank and welcome you as we honor and mourn the life of one who was taken from us far too soon. Inko Midoriya was a good and generous woman. The words that the pastor spoke swam and faded as Izuku's ears began to ring. This was really happening. He was really here sitting amongst people he hadn't seen since he was a child and listening to the pastor of the church that they used to attend speak kind and encouraging words about his mother. His mother. Flashes started filling his mind of the accident. Blood ... sirens ... red and blue lights. Looking back now, it all seemed like one big blur, but at the time it felt like an eternity. Izuku could have spent hours or mere minutes staring at the unmoving form of his mother until he was forced away by some paramedics who insisted on checking on him even though he was fine. Physically at least. It had been a week and the images stayed painted on the back of Izuku's eyelids. Anytime he tried to sleep, all he got were nightmares. Any downtime he took was filled with unwanted memories and guilt. And heaven forbid he tried to look in a mirror. Izuku doubted that he would be able to see himself and not break down at how much he looked like his mother anytime soon. Such a short amount of time. Yet it felt like centuries of agony. Muffled voices sounded around Izuku, and he could vaguely see people standing up around him, but he wasn't paying attention enough to realize why. Dazed, he slowly let himself drift. The pain, the voices, the memories, all of it falling away until a heavy hand landed on his back and jolted him back to reality. Your mother was a good woman. I am truly sorry, Midoriya. Please don't touch me. The only response he could manage was a slight nod. He knew that if he tried to talk his voice would crack, and if he looked at the man beside him then the tears that were pooling in his eyes would fall. Weak, useless, crybaby, coward. Izuku refused to cry in front of all of these people that he barely knew. Most of his life it was just him and his mom. Not much of anyone around. No friends, no family, no dad. But now that she's dead, suddenly all of these people care. Not when his father left her and she was on the brink. Not when she was struggling with working 2 to 3 jobs at a time to try to support herself and Izuku. Not when Izuku was diagnosed quirkless and both of their lives shifted drastically. Not when the kids at school tormented and tortured him every day just because he wasn't like them. It's funny how much people care when you're dead. It's like that old saying, you never know what you have until it's gone. Izuku knew. He knew exactly how blessed he was to have a mom that loved and cared for him and did everything in her power to prove that to him every day. He was fully aware of what an amazing person his mother was, and he made sure she knew it. Izuku knew. He had lost so much in his life that he knew when to hold on and appreciate what he had. So why was this happening to him? How could life be so cruel as to take away the one good thing he had in this god-forsaken world? It wasn't fair. The feeling in his chest was unlike anything he had ever felt before. It was clawing at him, digging under the skin and raking down, destroying everything in its path. It dragged its sharp claws up to Izuku's throat and latched on tight, slowly suffocating as the world closed in around him. No, no, please no. Not here, not now. Midoriya couldn't breathe. His vision blurred and he gripped the edge of his chair as he tried desperately to suck in whatever air he could. Pulsing pain erupted in his skull, threatening to break it apart, and he could feel his limbs shaking. This wasn't new to Izuku. He had experienced attacks like this before, but the pain that enveloped him was like crashing waves dragging him back under every time his head got above the water. Breath. Just breathe. In and out ... Come on, Izuku, it's not that hard. He leaned forward and put his head in between his legs to try and control his breathing. He needed an anchor, something to ground him, but his anchor was gone. She was ripped away from him and he would never get her back. How was he supposed to go on like this? The spiraling continued and he tried to hold back his sobs until it was physically painful, until his throat burnt with the strain and his head got dizzy. He couldn't break down like this, not here. Further and further down he sunk until he was jolted back to the surface by another pat on the back that caused him to flinch. Are you okay, honey? The voice was soft and light like a summer day, but he could hear the undertones of the storm coming. The sympathy and hesitation that came with these kinds of things. Once Izuku felt like he could look around without throwing up or passing out. He met the eyes of whoever decided to give their condolences next. It was Ms. Chiba, the shopkeeper at Mom's favorite flower store. She would go there at least every other week and bring home different flowers to brighten up the apartment. She always spoke highly of Ms. Chiba. She would say that she was a sweet old woman who would give her the best deals. Oh, hi Ms. Chiba. His voice came out in a whimper as he stood up. He wished that his body wouldn't give away such weakness. But his mother wore her emotions on her sleeve, and the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Yeah, I know. Before he could even finish whatever excuse was about to come out of his mouth, the little old lady wrapped her arms around him tightly. The action made Izuku freeze. He wasn't very comfortable with affection like this or physical contact in general, but he knew that this would be inevitable, so he tried his best to prepare himself. Guess he didn't do as well as he thought he did. Please don't. I don't like being touched. But she's so nice. She won't hurt me. Please let go. Miss Chiba sniffled in his ear and rubbed his back. I know, honey, you don't have to be okay. But it'll get better, I promise. How could she know that? She didn't know what happened or how he was feeling. She didn't know the nightmare he was about to go home to, or wherever he was going to end up. Empty promises. Izuku hated them. The old lady was still holding on to him until he managed to wiggle out of her embrace as nicely as possible. He really did not want people to touch him right now. He bade her a goodbye and looked for an opportunity to slip out. This whole thing was a wreck and painful, and all he really wanted to do was go home. Maybe it was pity or simple lack of caring, but he managed to leave without any interference and made his way back to his apartment. The walk back was a somber one. All Izuku could think about was how he was being forced to leave his home, the place where he grew up, the place where Mom used to be. He knew that it was necessary somewhere in his mind, but the feelings of bitterness overwhelmed any sensible thought that he might have had. He was going to be staying in an orphanage for the time being, so he needed to go to his apartment to gather his things to take with him, as that the rest of the stuff could be put into storage until he was old enough to access them. As he got closer to the building, his memories started spilling over the wall. He desperately tried to keep up. Moments of his childhood. Mom, growing up, laughing, crying. All things he wasn't ready to leave behind. He tried to commit as much of this place as he could to memory. The squeaky stairs and almost always out-of-order elevator. The way that the deadbolt always stuck when they tried to unlock the door. The smell of lavender and cookies that was constantly in the air due to his mother's joint love of plants and cooking. The dent on the hallway door frame from the time that Izuku slipped and bumped his head and ended up having to get 3 stitches. The warm light that always poured throughout the house because Mom loved the natural glow of the sun. All of these things began to turn sour somehow. Maybe it was because he knew that nothing would ever be like this again, or because he knew that this was the last time he would be seeing the apartment like this, so full of life. But as he looked longer, he could see it slowly fading as reality settled in, and his eyes pricked with tears before he shook away those thoughts and went to his room to pack up what he could. It didn't take Izuku long to gather what he wanted. He couldn't bring himself to bring much more than just the necessities. Clothes and such, his laptop and phone, a couple books, the blanket that his mom made him 2 Christmases ago, and whatever pictures of her he could. The decision to take any hero merch was a difficult one. On one hand, heroes were everything to Izuku. Ever since he got diagnosed as quirkless, they've been his lifeline to his dream. He became obsessed with them, chasing after all of the fights he could, studying and analyzing all he could about their quirks and fighting styles, and buying as much merch as he could to support them. His favorite hero, All Might, had the most presence in his room. He was his hero, his inspiration, but all of a sudden it didn't seem as important. Mom had always been supportive, even since the beginning. She was there when the news broke, and Izuku argued for hours about how he couldn't be quirkless because he didn't have the extra toe joint. And when he finally accepted it but still pressed on with his dreams of being a hero, it scared her, of course, but she must have loved him more than she feared his dreams because she was right there with him every step of the way. Finally, Izuku made up his mind. He wasn't going to take any hero merch with him, but he was going to keep it and have it stored away. That way he would still have access to it if he wanted. The orphanage was something. The building itself was old and overgrown with vines and greenery. Although some people liked that look, so Izuku didn't pay much attention to the outside. The inside was nice, sort of. It was a little cramped and cluttered, but that was to be expected when a lot of kids lived in the same place. Izuku went to his room so that he could put his stuff away and found that he was rooming with another boy. He was about his age and a little on the meatier side, but considering that Izuku was all skin and bones, he didn't think that he was a very good judge. The boy's name was Hiroto, and from what little he spoke to him and the constant glaring, it was clear that he wasn't too thrilled about getting a roommate. It didn't take long for Izuku to put his things away, and by the time he finished, the bell for dinner sounded and the 2 boys made their way to the dining hall. Hiroto didn't say anything as they walked, just occasionally scowled when he remembered he was being followed. When they got downstairs, the boy hurried away and joined up with what Izuku assumed to be his friends. Standing in the crowed dining hall, it was much clearer just how overfilled this house was with children. They all went through a line to get a plate and made their way to the 4 large tables to eat. Once everyone got their dinner, they gave thanks and dug in. The food was bland and not all that much to eat, but Izuku wasn't about to complain. He ended up sitting by himself, despite how overcrowded all of the tables were, and as he was halfway through his plate, a shadow fell over him. He looked up and met the eyes of his smirking roommate and a few of his friends. Oh no, maybe this time will be different. Not everyone is like Kaken, right? Hey newbie, are you gonna eat that? Hiroto asked in a gruff voice. Izuku looked up at him and then back to his fork that was halfway to his full mouth. Hiroto's smirk twitched, and he slammed his hand on the table, making some of the food on his plate splatter off of it. I said. He leaned closer. Are you gonna eat that? His little group of friends behind him snickered as Izuku swallowed down the last of what he was chewing. Yes. Wrong answer. Hiroto snatched his plate and turned back to his friends who were now full on laughing. Hey, Izuku stood up. That's my his words got cut off by his plate smacking against his face and exploding into his hair and on his clothes. This sent the group into fits of gasping laughter and snorts as Hiroto set the plate down and let out a small insincere oops. They walked away still laughing and talking about what happened, and suddenly Izuku wasn't hungry anymore. He decided to leave dinner early to go shower and get the food out of his hair. When he got back to his room, Hiroto was there going through some of his stuff. What are you doing? The boy froze and Izuku saw what was in his hand. His temper rose and his face got hot with anger. Put that down. The words were low and non-negotiable as they left his mouth. All he saw was this kid holding a picture of his mother, and his thoughts ran wild with all of the things that he might do to disrespect her, and Izuku was not going to let that happen. What did you just say to me? Hiroto turned his head to scowl at him full on. Deep breaths, Izuku. Don't give him another reason to hate you. After another moment, Izuku finally answered. This time his voice much lighter. Please don't touch those. They're very important to me. Oh, a mama's boy, are you? The smile on his roommate's face was ugly and alarming. He had way too much experience with smiles like that, but he was too slow to stop it. Hiroto looked him straight in the eye as he tore the photo of him and his mom from top to bottom and flung the pieces to the ground. Stop it. Izuku ran over to try to stop him from ripping up any more pictures, but that was a mistake, and he knew it. Hiroto grabbed him by the collar of his shirt and slammed him against the wall as his fist shifted into what looked like rocks and it spread halfway up his arms. Izuku cried out and felt his feet dangle beneath him, but Hiroto just laughed. Make me. You can't just come here and expect to be respected. You have to earn that respect. So, show me what you got, Shrimpy. When he didn't do anything, the boy just slammed him into the wall again, harder this time. I said make me. Or are you too much of a wimp to do anything? It soon became clear that he wasn't going to get anything out of this, so after a few more moments, Hiroto threw Izuku to the ground and scoffed as he walked away. Such a loser. It took some time, but Izuku finally found a place that no one really seemed to go near. An old janitor's closet, closed the door and sunk down as he began to let out his feelings for the day. He thought he probably spent an hour in there crying before he finally left and went to bed without another word to anyone or anything. Mom, please. I don't think I can do this. I wish that you were here. Wow, how can you possibly look worse than you did yesterday? The morning started out with Izuku waking up to an empty room, and he allowed himself to slightly hope that maybe today wouldn't be as bad as yesterday was. He was wrong. Hiroto snatched him away from breakfast, and he and his friends dragged him out to the side of the building near the trash cans. Once they got there, they threw him to the ground and laughed at Hiroto's comment. His roommate kneeled down to where Izuku was and grabbed his hair that was thankfully less tangled than it usually was due to his conditioner that he used last night. Do you want to know something funny? I asked around a bit and learned a very interesting fact about you. Oh no, this can't be happening. He hasn't even been here 24 hours yet. Do you want to know, guys? He turns his head to his friends who are nodding their heads with sadistic smiles on their faces. I heard that little Midoriya here is quirkless. Izuku stopped breathing. He suspected that this was what he was talking about, but he prayed with every inch of his being that it was something else, anything else. Hiroto yanked on his hair a bit and brought his head up. No wonder you didn't fight back last night, you can't. Laughter filled the alleyway and Izuku knew what was coming. It was always like this. He could feel the sting of his tears welling up in his eyes as he braced himself. This of course led to more laughter and taunts of how weak and pathetic he was. Deku, you're such a stupid crybaby. If you keep on crying, then I'll give you something to really cry about. The memories echoed in his head as the tears spilled over and ran down his face. Izuku hated himself. He hated that he was so weak that he couldn't stop himself from crying in front of these bullies. He hated that he wasn't strong enough to fend them off or at least put up a fight. He hated that he had to be such a failure that he couldn't even have the right anatomy to be quirkless. He had to be the 0.1% that didn't have the toe joint and were still quirkless. He hated that Mom wasn't here to pick him up and tell him that everything was going to be okay. The beating wasn't as bad as it usually was. The worst part was Hiroto's rock quirk. From what Izuku saw, he could turn his body into rock and even shape it into weapons. At the moment he just used big rock hands to pummel people, but it wouldn't be surprising to see the quirk grow to be used like that. None of the other guys helped too much with the beating. They just sat back and watched and encouraged Hiroto. By the end of it, Izuku was left crumpled on the ground feeling like he got run over by a bus. And then run over again by another bus. He could already feel the bruises and knew that almost his entire chest and back were going to be covered in black and blue. At least he had the decency to not hit places that were easily seen. He would only have a couple bruises on his arms, legs, neck, and face. He probably had a black eye, but it wasn't the worst thing that he's ever had, and at least nothing was broken. That he could tell. The walk or limp to school was longer than Izuku was used to. His and Mom's apartment was only about a 6-minute walk away from his middle school, whereas where he was now was at least a 20-minute one, and not being able to walk correctly certainly didn't help. He was thankful that he was able to stay at the school until he graduated. It would have been a nightmare to transfer and have to deal with being the new kid only a couple of months from the end of the year. The bell rang just as Izuku walked through the entrance, and he had to rush to change his shoes and make his way up to where his classroom was on the 3rd floor. He tripped halfway up the staircase and had to bite his tongue to stop from crying out due to landing on one of the really bad bruises on his leg. Once he finally got to class, the teacher was almost done with attendance, and he tried his best to sneak to his seat without being noticed, but his classmates had other ideas. "Hey look, Deku is late. What a loser, can't even make it to class on time. Useless, Midoriya." The teacher's voice rang out above the snickering of his classmates, and Izuku winced at their tone. Being late to class is unacceptable, you know this. His chest tightened, and he could feel the growing pressure of his anxiety creep up. "Why yes I know, you see what had happened was. I don't want your excuses. You will stay after school for detention, and maybe then you'll learn some time management skills." Izuku wanted to defend himself and explain that he had moved and so his morning had been a little hectic. But he knew that they wouldn't listen. It was always like this. He was just too big of a screw-up for them to overlook his mistakes like they do the other kid. They all have potential to be heroes and are on paths to greatness, and Izuku WSN. It's not like he deserves pity or exceptions anyways. He should have done better this morning. Sure, he couldn't have known that he was going to get jumped by those boys, but he could have walked faster or not tripped on the stairs. If he weren't so useless and pathetic, then he wouldn't have these problems. It sucks being quirkless. Stupid little Deku has to stay for detention because he can't do anything right. Is that a surprise to anyone? Didn't think so. Kaken's voice wasn't as quiet as he probably meant it to be, and he and his lackeys laughed as they passed Izuku's desk. "Try to not be any more of an idiot than you already are. The teacher doesn't need you bothering them." He was right, of course. The teacher had to stay after class to keep him in detention, and that was just more of their day that he was taking up because he was so stupid. Stupid, dumb, useless, burden, Deku. Nice going. You were late and now you're inconveniencing the teacher. I really am sorry. It was just him and the teacher in the classroom now. He was supposed to finish the stack of extra work that he was given before he could leave, and he was trying his best to get through the pile. But he must be stupider than he thought, because it was taking him forever. The teacher sighed at their desk where they were reading some book that Izuku didn't know. "I don't need nor want your apologies, Midoriya. Just hurry up with that work." "Of course, sorry." Izuku winced and caught sight of the teacher rolling their eyes at their desk. He needed to stop doing that, but he can't help it. Stupid. Just get your work done and leave. 30 minutes later, all of the extra work on his desk was completed and turned in, and he was on his way to his locker so that he could change his shoes and head home. Mom was probably going to ask why he was late. "Oh, guess I don't have to worry about that anymore." Izuku's mood plummeted. Dark thoughts and feelings encased him as he slowly walked out of the entrance and down to the gate, and so he didn't notice the movement next to him until he was grabbed and dragged away by multiple hands holding him and covering his mouth so he couldn't scream. It didn't take long for him to recognize the hands and voices of his classmates. They were the ones that always followed Kaken around and joined in on picking on him. He prayed that today's beating wouldn't be a bad one. All he really wanted to do was crawl in a hole and cry, but he knew that if he started crying now, they would just hit him harder. So, he would just have to be strong and hold out. "Guys, maybe today isn't the day. Didn't you hear about?" "Shut up. No one cares." Deku was late to class and had to stay behind for detention like an idiot. And he needs to be taught a lesson. The other guys grunted in agreement as they continued to carry him to wherever they were going. They had 2 people holding his arms and legs and then some around to make sure that he couldn't escape. They talked as they walked, mostly about normal school stuff. Some talked about Kaken and how he was applying to the UA Hero course and how they thought that he was going to make it in no question. Izuku agreed with them. If anyone was going to make it as a hero out of this school, it was Kaken. For one, his quirk was incredibly strong and perfect for being a hero. But not only was his quirk strong, but he was just strong himself. He always got what he wanted and had people following and sucking up to him because they knew that he was just that great. He was the best at everything and worked his hardest to stay that way. Not like Izuku, he couldn't do anything right. No quirk, no strength, no backbone, no mom. Izuku could never be like that. The group stopped walking and adjusted their hold on him. "Hey Bakugo, we brought him." "Good." Izuku knew that voice anywhere. The voice of his childhood best friend, of the person who he always looked up to and strived to be like. Izuku was dropped to the ground without warning and ended up hitting the back of his head on the concrete on the ground, which sent spots across his vision for a moment. He wanted to rub the back of his head. He wanted to get off of his tailbone that was most certainly bruised now, but he knew better, and he didn't want to bring any more pain on himself than was necessary. "Get up, Deku. You look like a slug laying on the ground like that," Kaken's voice demanded with a hint of a smile. Izuku obeyed and gingerly stood up and saw that he was in an alleyway surrounded by Kaken and his lackeys. He tried not to make eye contact with any of them and kept his head down as he prepared himself for what he knew was going to happen. This sent laughter throughout the group, and someone behind him commented, "It's almost too easy, he's getting to be no fun." That didn't sound very good to Izuku. Kaken scoffed and walked closer to where he stood. "You're so pathetic. Makes me wonder if it's even worth it to teach you these lessons." "I am sorry." Sound rattled through the alleyway. A warning explosion. "Shut your mouth." Another guy off to the side like he was bored. "Come on, Bakugo. If you're going to rough him up, just do it already." Kaken turned around slowly and glared at the guy who made the comment, causing him to straighten and take a step back. "Don't tell me what to do." He growled and turned back to Izuku. "He's right though. Wouldn't want to make you too late getting home. Auntie and Co would have a heart attack." Bakugo, the unsure guy from before, snapped. "What? You can't just say that." Kaken's expression turned slightly confused as he looked at the guy whose eyes seemed to be 2 sizes larger than they were before, and he kept on darting his gaze back and forth between Izuku and him. "What's wrong with you? You think you can correct me and try to tell me what to do?" Sparks started firing from his hands as he took a step towards the guy. "Want me to teach you a lesson too?" The guy shook his head and lowered his eyes. "That's what I thought." Izuku is sure that he probably said some more things after that, but his thoughts began to roll in on each other like waves. Thoughts of his mother and how he would never get to go home and have her worry over where he had been. He would never feel her too tight embrace or hear her quiet singing as she cooked and cleaned. At some point a fist collided with his face that jarred him back to reality, and he stumbled into one of the alley walls. "Listen to me when I'm talking, Deku." What? I'm sorry, what were you saying?" This just made Kaken's tempter rise more, and he reached out to hit him again. But Izuku's instincts kicked, and he tried to dodge the blow but ended up running into one of the guys beside him, who shoved him away and right into Kaken's exploding fist. He crumpled to the ground with a hand holding the side of his face where the explosive punch landed. His left ear was ringing, and he could feel some tears roll down his cheeks defiantly. That was pathetic. And you think that you can be a hero? You can't even dodge a punch without screwing up. There's no way that you could ever help anyone." The words flowed through his right ear and around in his head. "Pathetic. There's no way you could ever help anyone. Useless, Deku. You'll never be a hero. Each hit was intentional. That's for ignoring us. And that's for being an idiot. That's for getting detention, kick after kick, punch after punch. And that's for the stunt you pulled the other day. How dare you try to save me from some weak villain that even you wouldn't be able to take down." It was pathetic and insulting. Bakugo hit him with another quirked punch to the side of his head, and a fresh wave of ringing washed over Izuku. "Useless, useless, useless. Deku, idiot, coward, worthless waste of space, pathetic, weak." Izuku's chest tightened painfully to the point where he had to physically grab it with the hand that wasn't still holding his ringing ear. The words stung as they swirled and grew. He had heard it 100 times before, so why was it taking root now? Why was this getting to him so much now? "I think that you can do anything that you put your mind to, baby. Oh, Izuku, you're kind and intelligent and strong, and you care about people. That's what really matters, not having a powerful quirk, but what's in your heart. I believe in you." That was what was different. Mom had always been his anchor, his lifeline, and now she was gone. And she was never coming back. Look at him. Not even attempting to fight back. Laughter sounded around him, and Kaken began to walk away, followed by everyone else. They walked up to him and patted him on the back, and one even gave him a high five for his beatdown, saying just how cool he was. They were all exiting the alley's mouth when Kaken stopped and turned his head to look back at Izuku. "You're nothing and always will be. Why don't you just do all of us a favor and take the swan dive so that we don't have to deal with your shit anymore?" And with that they were gone, and Izuku was left on the ground. Warm tears streamed down his face, but he was numb, no feeling, no pain. It all just stopped, and he knew what he was going to do. He had made his decision. Izuku's legs burned as he climbed up yet another set of stairs. Both fortunate and unfortunately for him, the school had a lot of floors, and that meant a lot of stairs to climb to get to the roof. The thought of having to climb 2 more flights almost deterred him from what he was about to do. Almost. As he rounded the corner and looked at more and more stairs, he cursed under his breath and started climbing. What was a little pain when there would soon be nothing to feel? Conflicting thoughts chased each other around in his head. Thoughts of how crushed his mom would be if she were still here. Memories of her always telling him that things would get better and that he was the strongest person she knew. She was wrong. Izuku wasn't strong, he was tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of enduring. Tired of getting pushed around. Tired of picking himself up just to be knocked down again. Tired of hating himself. And God, did he hate himself. The darkness in his mind dissipated as the hope of relief poked through. He could only imagine just how nice it was going to be to not be here anymore. To not have to live in this broken and unfair world. The thought almost made him smile. It helped that he was positive now that he could do this without hurting anyone. Before, just the thought of what his mom would go through chased away any permanent feelings of ending it all. But she wasn't here anymore. She left him, and he was ready to join her. Would they be together? Would they be happy? Izuku vaguely remembered the times where he and Mom would go to church every Sunday and read the Bible, but those days had ended a while ago. He didn't really know why they stopped going, but he remembered just how at peace he felt when he was there. Maybe if things had turned out different, he would go back and try to dive back into the faith. Finally, Izuku made it to the top of the building and opened the unlocked roof door. He wasn't quite sure why the school doors weren't locked yet. Maybe not everyone was gone yet. He winced at the possibility of one of his teachers finding him, but quickly brushed the thought aside before he could lose his nerve. The roof was big, and had some benches where students ate their lunch sometimes. Their school hadn't had to put fencing around the roof yet, which Izuku was thankful for, although he guessed that after today, they would have to. Oh well. He walked over to the edge of the rooftop and overlooked the city. Their school was in a pretty good place, not too many other buildings surrounding it, but still close enough to everything else that most students didn't have to take the bus. The sun had begun to set, and Izuku watched the sky transform with streaks of red and pink and purple. The streetlights and other light around the building had just turned on as well, making the whole scene absolutely breathtaking. Izuku felt silent tears trickle down his cheeks as he overlooked everything. He was going to miss this, just how beautiful the world could be despite all of the crap it holds. Mom would have loved this. The breath hitched on its way, and then Izuku allowed himself to dwell a bit longer on the scene in front of him before he wiped his face off and stepped up to the ledge. Okay, deep breath in and out. I'm sorry, Mom. I'll see you soon. And with that, he let himself fall silently off of the building. Wind immediately rushed up to him as he fell. It was loud but also quiet. Peaceful. He could still see the sunset, and even though his tears got caught in the wind, he knew that he was probably crying again. He felt ... not happy, relieved. He felt free. The ground was coming. He knew it. He allowed himself one last look at the beautiful world around him and closed his eyes, bracing himself for the impact. But it never came. Or at least, he didn't feel it. But that was kinda the point of jumping off the roof, a quick and hopefully painless death. So why didn't he feel dead? One moment he was in complete darkness, and the next blinding light surrounded him on all sides. He covered his eyes until they adjusted to the brightness of wherever he was, and when he finally looked, he realized that he wasn't alone. Right in front of him, maybe 6 feet away, was a figure in all white. Their dress flowed around them and made them look like an angel, and maybe they were. With the straight green hair and a half-up hairdo that Izuku knew all too well, they certainly could have passed for one. A choked sob escaped Izuku's throat, and he went to take a step forward but stopped when the figure turned their head to look at him. Bright green eyes met his and softened. Beautiful emerald green eyes that always shone with enough love and light to fill up any room they entered. Eyes that were wasted on Izuku's constantly exhausted face, but somehow fit him so well. The last time he saw those eyes, they were tired, so tired, and sad, not for themselves, but for him. They knew what was going on, how could they not? Bakugo and the others weren't exactly subtle. And no matter how beaten or bruised he was when he got home, those eyes always met him at the door and welcomed him home. They always gave him so much hope and comfort. He had been trying so hard to be strong for her sake. He knew that she wouldn't have wanted him to cry over her too much. Not that he really gave himself the chance to. He didn't cry in front of people, and ever since what happened he hadn't had enough time alone to let himself let it all out. So he kept on building up wall after wall, reinforcing them and pushing back the wave of grief that only got taller and taller the more he pushed it back. He kept any thoughts of her on a tight leash, because if he didn't, then he knew that the weight of everything would come crashing down on him. So he just kept on building up the dam, further and further up. And now, looking at those eyes again, the dam broke. Izuku's legs gave out from under him, and he sank to his knees, clutching his chest. Everything was coming back to him. All of the feelings of grief and anger and betrayal and regret. It all blurred together as he cried and let go of everything he was holding back. Was this it? Was he dead? His breathing shook and tears kept on coming so fast that Izuku couldn't blink them away enough to see clearly. It wasn't until he felt a light hand on his shoulder that he looked up and saw green through the tears and knew who it was. Mom. Izuku. Her voice was soft and comforting, wrapping him tightly in a feeling of total peace with just one word. It was okay. Everything was okay now, because his mom was here and he was here with her. Oh, baby. She placed her hand on the side of his face and then moved it to under his chin to lift his face up. You're not supposed to be here. And all of a sudden, everything around him came crashing down. What? His voice was barely a whisper. It was low and strained from crying, and he couldn't keep the shock from his tone. I'm not supposed ... What are you talking about, Mom? I'm here. I'm right here, and so are you. We're together and... No, honey, this is wrong. It was like a stab to the chest. How could she say that? How could she say that he wasn't supposed to be here? Did she not want him here? Betrayal began to crawl up his back and plant its claws into him. He was sure that his eyes showed it. How could they not? He was never good at hiding his feeling from her, and he was sure that she saw it, if her now pained expression indicated anything. He didn't know when he started shaking. Maybe it was when he was sobbing, or maybe it was due to his mother's words, but he couldn't stop. He searched her eyes, searched for something, anything. Feelings of relief or joy to see her son. Regret for leaving him, regret for hurting him, but he didn't know what he saw. It was too many emotions for him to understand. I don't understand, how could you say that? Are you not happy to see me? Izuku's voice broke and his eyes filled up once again with fresh tears that soon spilled over and down his cheek. Oh no. Her arms flew around him and held him tight against her. No, baby, that's not what I meant at all. Izuku sniffled. Then what do you mean? Reluctantly, she let go of him and sat back on her knees, looking at him with sad eyes. It's not your time yet, sweetheart. You can't be here. You have to go back. His breathing stopped altogether at her words. Anger slowly filled his chest as he thought of what he left behind and what would be waiting for him if he went back. No, what? Izuku. His mom tried to place her hand on his shoulder again. But he shook it off. No, I can't, I won't. But, you don't know, you have no idea what it's like back there. Pain entered her expression as she looked her son over. He was still in his school uniform. He didn't have any bruises or anything on his skin from what she could see. He didn't have a single scar that she had memorized one by one as they appeared. Even the seemingly permanent bruises under his eyes were gone. Her son looked healthy, and then he didn't. His appearance flickered as she looked at him. The clean and healthy image would flicker to what she knew he looked like now, pale, unhealthily thin, bruises and burns covering most of his body and his eyes. He never told her what was going on, but she had always suspected. You don't get injuries like that from just being clumsy. And in time she asked him about it. He would deny and deflect the conversation to other topics that he knew would distract her. But she had seen it, she saw it all now. She had been watching, and the pain in her chest grew and grew the more that she thought about it. It had to have been going on for years, and he just didn't say anything. How could he not say anything? How could he not care about himself enough to try to stop it? It hurt her. It hurt her to see the desperate look on her son's face now. It didn't surprise her that he didn't want to go back. She didn't want him to go back either, but that wasn't up to her. It wasn't his time yet. He still had so much to do and he didn't even know it. I know, and I'm sorry. For not being more persistent about what was going on, for not stopping it. She bit her lip and closed her eyes. You can do this, Inko, she thought to herself. You have to, for Izuku. I'm sorry for leaving you. Whatever composition that was in her son's face crumbled in an instant. Tears pooled in his sad eyes and spilled over and down his thin and bruised cheeks. For a moment it was only silence that stretched between them until the sobs finally came. She knew that it wasn't fair. It wasn't fair to leave him. It wasn't fair to have to watch over him silently. It wasn't fair to see and talk to him now, and it wasn't fair to send him back to that wretched place. But if only he knew ... if he knew all of the good he was going to do, he would understand. Inko Midoriya's son was always special. The brightest and happiest kid you would have ever met despite the crushing weight of all that was happening around him. You'd never have guessed what he was going through, not that he'd let you know anyway. Izuku was just like that. Good, kind, selfless, a light breaking through all of the darkness around him. He was strong, always had been. And Inko hated that her son had to be. He didn't deserve this. With everything that he's been through, didn't he deserve a break? How cruel could life be to keep on throwing obstacle on top of obstacle at him without letting up? He just needed to wait a little bit longer. The light at the end of the tunnel was coming. It wouldn't be easy, and Ko knew that. And it broke her heart to know that more pain was coming for him, but Izuku was strong. The strongest person she knew. I'm so sorry, honey. Tears of her own began to fill in Ko's eyes. It wasn't a surprise. She had always been an empathetic crier, but these tears were not for her. No, they were for Izuku. But it's time for you to go. Her son's voice caught as his breath hitched. I don't want to go yet, he let out with his voice broken and quiet from crying. It pierced right through Inko's heart, and she couldn't help herself anymore. She lunged forward and wrapped her arms around her son's shaking form as she rubbed his back in an attempt to comfort, but she knew that there was no comfort for what was to come. She moved one of her hands up to hold the back of Izuku's head and keep him as close to her as possible. SHH, she whispered in his ear, her own voice shaking. I know, I love you. Izuku's arms tightened around her as if it would keep him from leaving, and it was a few moments of him calming his breathing down before he replied, I love you too. Air. Izuku needed air. He didn't know why that was something that he needed to be told, but his body was screaming at him to wake up and breathe. He shot straight up from wherever he was lying, gasping and screaming and crying. Streams of tears continued to pour down his face even as he finally got his bearings and didn't feel like he was dying ... well, as much. The tears confused him until memories suddenly began flashing through his mind and his vision got blurry from the fresh water beginning to spill over. Mom. He managed to get out through his scratchy throat that was in desperate need of some water and whatever medicine he could find. Izuku's body hurt all over. He couldn't even tell where the pain specifically was. It just was there. Physically, mentally, emotionally, all-consuming and crushing. Memories of what happened before started coming to him as well, and disappointment intertwined with the grief as it all began to settle in his mind. He wasn't dead. Crap. Anger soon took over anything else that Izuku may have been feeling, until his only thoughts were stings of curse words and how he somehow didn't die and was back in this. Wherever he was, his mind was going a bit too fast for him to properly take in his surroundings. But from what he did get, he was in a gray room that was dimly lit and mostly empty. On the back wall was a long line of square metal lockers. There was nothing on the bland walls except for the metal double doors on the other side of the room. He could feel that he was on a cold metal table with some type of cloth or blanket draped over him, and the only other things in the room with him were a couple of carts with tools on them and a metal double sink on the right side of the room. How could he have been so stupid? Jumping off of the school roof was not permanent enough apparently. Izuku thought that it would have been tall enough that it would immediately take him out. But he must have been wrong. That could explain why he hurt so bad. But if he had survived the fall, then he wouldn't be able to move anything. So why didn't he feel like all of his bones were broken? A sudden chill crept up Izuku's body, and his eyes widened at a realization. Why did he feel like he was naked? Slowly, Izuku moved his right arm, wincing at how stiff and painful the action was, and took a deep breath before lifting up the cloth covering him. Maybe it was because he was naked. But why was he naked? And what was that? Izuku examined what he could see of his body to make sure that all of him was there, and finally noticed his chest. There was a large T-shaped scar going all the way down his torso that looked freshly healed. Did that mean that he didn't have all of his organs? He felt fine as far as he knew, really tired, but what else was new? What organs could you live without? Kidneys. No, you needed your kidneys. But maybe not both of them. What if they took his kidneys? Or what about his appendix? He was pretty sure that you could do without your appendix. Otherwise people wouldn't have surgeries to remove them all of the time. Right. Mid-freakout, Izuku glanced around him and remembered that he was in an unknown place with no clothes on, a new huge scar, and had been there for who knows how long. Priorities, he reminded himself. Find some clothes and figure out where the heck you are, and then worry about your appendix. Gingerly, he sat up and searched around for anything he could cover up with. The place looked hospital-esque, so there had to be some scrubs or a lab coat somewhere. He didn't see anything that he could use, so that meant it was time for Plan B. Izuku carefully slid off of the metal table he had been lying on, his body screaming at him for the movement, and wrapped the cloth that was used to cover him around himself. He secured it so that it wouldn't fall off easily and moved to find a way out of wherever he was. The double doors were probably his best bet, so, peeking sneakily out of one of the doors and seeing that the coast was clear, he tiptoed out and around the corner. No one seemed to be around, but that didn't mean anything. Izuku still didn't know where he was, or what he was doing there, so he needed to keep his guard up. People began to pop up here and there, walking through the fluorescent halls, chatting with other people or writing on their clipboards. They were all dressed in scrubs, and Izuku felt his stomach drop as his mind wandered to where he could possibly be. Things started adding up until the truth was right in front of his eyes. He couldn't believe it. He didn't want to believe it. How could it be possible? It didn't make any sense. Although a lot of things didn't exactly make sense at the moment. Shaking the thought away, Izuku carried on in his attempt to find clothes and escape. Eventually, he found a door labeled locker room and felt a smile spread across his face. There had to be something he could wear in there. Once he made sure that the coast was clear, he quickly got into the room and slipped behind one of the walls just in case someone else was in there. They weren't. Izuku quickly found a pair of black scrubs in a locker that looked roughly his size. Guilt tugged in the back of his mind that stealing was wrong, but he had to shove that voice down for the time being. Luckily, he also found a pair of white tennis shoes in his size and was out of the door looking like he belonged there. Well, as much as a middle schooler could. It didn't take him long after that to find an exit and sneak out of it quickly. As soon as he was out of the large building, Izuku let out a breath he didn't know he had been holding. The fresh air felt good in his lungs, and the chill of the night was somewhat comforting. The further he got from the building, the more his thoughts began to pop up and swirl around in his mind. He couldn't deny what he knew. He had been in a hospital, in an empty room on a table, naked, and with no one around. But he wasn't dead. Right. There was no way he was dead. He could feel himself breathing and could feel the chilling air wrap around his uncovered arms. A dead person wouldn't be able to feel that, right? But then what was with that scar on his chest? And his mom? The memory broke through his walls before he could stop it, and immediately his eyes began to tear up. He had seen and talked with his mom. That he knew. Now how was a whole other issue. And he had jumped off of a building. Wouldn't he have broken limbs or something if he wasn't dead? But he felt completely fine, other than the now dull pain that was slowly fading. He was just really, really tired. And it was beginning to catch up with him now that his adrenaline levels were returning to normal. I died. There's no way that I didn't ... So why am I here? It's not your time yet, sweetheart. You can't be here. You have to go back. His mother's words rang in his ears, and the reality set in ... Sort of. He had died, but he had come back because it wasn't his time yet, or something. And he was in a morgue because he had been dead. But wasn't anymore. Why wasn't he dead anymore? And without injuries, no less. The only thing to show for it was what he assumed to be an autopsy scar. There are so many things that didn't make sense to him. But one thing was abundantly clear: he was alive, and he really didn't want to be. As he got farther from the hospital, he began to recognize the area and had confidence in his ability to make it back to the orphanage, even though he had only really been there once. Kakin and the other kids would often run him all around town, and he'd have to find his way home from anywhere. So he began to study town maps and even some of the towns around as well, just in case. So he knew that he could get where he needed to go from pretty much anywhere. He got a few weird looks as he made his way down the streets and tried to not think too much about it. They probably just thought that he looked very young to be a doctor, but he had bigger problems to deal with. Who had found him? Who knew that he had died? Who knew that he had jumped? Did someone tell the school? What about the orphanage? What if he went back there? And his thoughts halted to a stop when he rounded a tall bush just outside of the orphanage's gates and saw a small group of the adults huddled close. He strained himself to try to hear what they were talking about, and his heart stopped when he finally did. Did you hear about that new boy? How he died? He committed suicide. One of the ladies shushed the other, who had talked very bluntly, and looked around. Don't say that too loud, you might give the other kids ideas. The blunt lady rolled her eyes and her frown deepened on her face. What kind of kid would commit suicide like that anyways? Must have just done it for attention. I did hear that his mom just died. Whatever, it's still ridiculous. No kid has any right to kill themselves like that. I mean, what do they even have to be sad about? School, bedtime. Like, come on, one of the other ladies scoffed, and the blunt lady scowled at her. You have no idea what you're talking about. The lady who had shushed them earlier placed her hands on both of their shoulders in an attempt to defuse the situation. Listen, it doesn't matter now. Some of the other ladies are already cleaning his room out and throwing his stuff in the trash, so we need to figure out who the next one coming is going to be. The group nodded and turned to head inside of the building, and Izuku stood there hunched against a bush, frozen. He didn't have a home anymore. They thought that he died, and they were going to. They were throwing his stuff away. Izuku took off around the building to where he knew the dumpsters were. He couldn't lose his things. They were some of the only things that he had left of Mom, and he wasn't ready to let go yet. As he rounded a corner and got to the trash cans, he saw that they had already trashed all of his stuff. It sat loosely on top of some trash bags, thankfully. And lucky for him, there was an empty garbage bag right next to the dumpsters. So he grabbed it and started putting his belongings into it. That way he could carry it all easily. Okay, he had his stuff. Now it was time to go. Though, he didn't have a home. Where was he supposed to go? Everyone thought that he was dead. And he couldn't exactly walk up to a stranger and declare his resurrection. They'd just think that he was crazy, and then they would probably call the police, and they already knew that he was quirkless, so if he tried to tell them what happened, they would probably think that he was lying, and then they would. Deep breaths, Izuku. Deep breaths. He knew that he was beginning to spiral, and he wasn't surprised. He had nowhere to go, not a lot of money, and no one who knew that he was alive. He was alone. Again, Izuku's immediate thought was instantly shot down as he remembered what had just happened and how death had literally rejected him just like everybody else. So what was he supposed to do? He knew what his ultimate goal was, but it might take a little bit more time than he was hoping to get there. Until then, he needed some place to sleep, but where could he go? His thoughts longed to go back home, but he didn't really know what that was anymore. Maybe his old apartment. People probably had moved in already, but it didn't hurt to check. And it would only be for a little bit, just until he could find a loophole in whatever this sick game life was playing on him. Luckily, Izuku wasn't one to give up. 20 minutes later, Izuku was standing across the street from his old apartment building. Everything looked the same. The dim street lights, the creepy guys loitering outside on the sidewalk, the flickering outside light. It was as if nothing had changed, as if his mother hadn't died and he hadn't been left alone. He shook the thoughts from his head before they could poison his concentration. These could be dealt with later, but he needed to find out how to get inside the building and inside of his old apartment without getting caught or recognized. Piece of cake. Turns out that scaling a building is a lot than you'd think. It didn't help that he was also trying to carry a trash bag full of the few items he still had. If Izuku hadn't literally just died, he might have been terrified to be clinging to a small edge on the side of his apartment balcony 3-4 stories up. But he was just chilling. It took him a couple of tries. But he eventually managed to fling himself over the railing and onto the balcony floor along with his trash bag of belongings, landing on his back with a grunt. This is the worst. I don't think that things could go any more downhill from here. But at least that means they have to start going uphill at some point, right? After a few more seconds of self-pity, Izuku picked himself up and tried to peek into the dark apartment, pushing his thoughts aside for the time being. It didn't look like anyone was in there, but it was still nighttime. If someone was there, they'd probably be asleep by now. Izuku racked his brain for something. Anything he could do to figure this out, but sometimes there's only one thing to do. Even if there were people living there now, what were they going to do? Report a dead person breaking into their old apartment. Right, good luck with that. The only problem now was how would he get in? Luckily for him, he secretly kept one of the apartment keys for sentimental reasons. Guessed that he was going to be able to put it to good use now, as long as they hadn't already changed the locks. Please work, please. Click. Izuku smiled widely as he slid the balcony door open and stepped into his old apartment. He didn't think that he had smiled since her death. Ironic that the first time would be while he was doing something illegal. He quietly walked through the house to see if anyone had moved in. Everything looked pretty much the same as the last time he had been there. The police and storage company had taken almost everything out, so the place looked very empty with only a couch and matching chair in the living room facing an unoccupied entertainment center, bare walls, and a loud silence that was slowly suffocating Izuku. After a full walkthrough, Izuku concluded that the apartment was indeed empty. Too empty. Even without the visual, everything reminded him of his life before. It was like ghosts of memories haunting him and casting an illusion in his vision to make him see the place how it used to be. The thoughts began to make Izuku nauseous, but what was he going to throw up? He was pretty sure he hadn't eaten for more than 24 hours. He looked in all of the cabinets and in the off-fridge and confirmed what he had already suspected. Like everything else, they had cleared out all of the food. Great, but at least he had the things from the orphanage. Izuku had kept a few snacks with him there, because he wasn't sure if he would like the food there or maybe get hungry in between scheduled meals. Luckily, the staff had thrown those out with everything else and Izuku was able to pick them up and stuff them into his trash bag. Minutes later, Izuku was sitting cross-legged in the middle of the couch with a small bag of chips in his hand and a bowl of toilet water on the coffee table in front of him. They had taken all of the dishes from the kitchen, but Izuku had kept one of his mom's favorite bowls that a friend gave her years ago. She used to use it constantly, so he thought that he might as well take it and continue to use it as she did. It gave him some weird feeling of comfort while also slowly filling him with melancholy over thinking of his mother. He had been subconsciously putting off thinking about her too much, but he was alone now, and nothing was stopping him from taking everything in. And boy was it a lot. Tears began to fill his eyes once again as he went over the past few days. The funeral, moving, the orphanage, those kids bullying him, Kakin and his friends, the jump, the interaction he had with his mother, waking up in the morgue. So much had happened and he was right back where he started, alone, only this time he was truly alone. What was he going to do? Izuku glanced down at his wrist. The watch he was wearing was one that his mother had given him a year ago for his birthday. It was red, white, and blue, with a bit of yellow mixed in to look like All Might's hero costume. He remembered just how excited he was when he got it. She had been smiling the entire day and was practically bouncing on her feet as he opened the present, and when he did, he almost tackled her to the ground in a hug. He was thankful that it hadn't been lost when the orphanage threw away his stuff. The apartment didn't have any electricity, so he had to rely on his watch for the time and a flashlight he found to navigate around. The time read 1:15 am. Not too late, Izuku thought. It wasn't uncommon for him to stay up late studying or analyzing different hero fights he saw online, but to most people it was pretty late. Now that his adrenaline levels were back to normal, it was all he could do to keep his eyes open. He didn't know how he had not noticed it before, but he was extremely exhausted, like more so than he had ever been before. If he had the chance, Izuku could probably sleep for a week and wake up feeling very well rested. On the bright side, that pain he had was pretty much gone now, but it had been replaced by more exhaustion. It couldn't have been good for him to die and come back to life and then escape and break into his old apartment. A lot had happened, and it was time to just take a break for a while. He probably didn't have school tomorrow considering that everyone thought he was dead and dead people don't go to school. So, Izuku would take that opportunity to sleep in, something he hadn't done in pretty much ever. Mom was always an early riser, and he liked to wake up with her and spend the mornings doing whatever she wanted to because it made her happy and he just wanted to see more of her smile. He missed that smile. The next thing Izuku knew, he was waking up with a start drenched in sweat and hyperventilating from crying. It was just a dream. I'm fine, I'm okay, I'm alive. Once he finally calmed himself down, he rolled off of the couch with a groan. It would probably be a good idea for him to get up and change and see what time it was. It was difficult to tell from the sun outside. If Izuku didn't know any better, he'd say that the sun was about to set, but there was no way. Or maybe there was. After glancing at his watch, still half asleep, he jumped to his feet and swayed a bit at how quickly he had gotten up. According to his watch, it was almost 7 p.m., but that couldn't be right. He couldn't have slept for 15 hours, could he? He had been really tired last night and dying probably took a lot out of him. Well, okay. Well, he could figure out what to do about that later. He was still in his soaking wet clothes and needed to change into something not drenched in sweat. He wondered about how he was going to wash his clothes. He might be able to go to a laundromat and he did have that little bit of money he had stashed with him at the orphanage. Again, a problem for later. Izuku slowly shook out of the daze he was in and his senses began to come back to him. The first thing he noticed was that he was still tired. How? He had no idea, but it was what it was he guessed. The next was that he was hungry, understandable considering he only had a bag of chips for food yesterday. Maybe he would be able to stop by somewhere and buy something small. But would anybody recognize him? Izuku immediately pushed the thought aside. He wasn't important enough for people off the street to recognize him, so he could probably get away with going to get some food. Honestly, he just wanted to get out of the apartment for a bit. If he was away, then he wouldn't have to think about anything, and that's exactly what he needed. To not think. Izuku peeled out of his clothes and searched through his trash bag for something else to wear. He didn't have much, something that he would need to change if he wasn't going to be dying anytime soon, but he might hold off on that for a bit, just until he knew for sure that he wasn't able to. He ended up pulling on a pair of faded black sweatpants that looked closer to dark gray now and an old All Might hoodie that was 2 sizes too big for him. The outfit gave him a sense of nostalgia. It made him feel almost normal, like everything had just been a bad dream and he and Mom were about to go out to get groceries for dinner and talk the night away. Slipping out the window and down the fire escape was a lot easier than it had been last night. Izuku didn't know why he didn't just use this then, but at least he knew that he could scale a building now, so that was nice. When he got down to the street and began walking, people didn't give him a second glance. Good. He didn't need to be recognized and questioned about why he wasn't dead. Even so, he pulled the hood up and over his mess of hair as he walked and shoved his hands in his pocket, trying to look as nondescript as possible. Not that he ever had issues with that before. He was always teased about how plain-looking he was. Guess it was a blessing now. All the shops weren't too far away from his apartment, which he was grateful for, but he did need to pass a park on the way there. As he was walking, he noticed that there was a small gathering of people a little bit further ways in the park, kind of near the cemetery part of it. He almost brushed it off and kept on walking, but he caught sight of some spiky blonde hair that was too familiar to ignore. What could Kaken be doing in the park this late in the day? As he got closer, he saw the backs of 2 more familiar people and wondered what could be so important that the entire Bakugo family was here. That's also when he realized that everyone in the group had been wearing black and was circled around something. The closer he got, the easier it was to hear whoever was talking. It sounded like someone talking at a funeral, but why would? Oh, there beside the man who was speaking was a picture of Izuku. It had been taken a while ago. He was smiling widely, and his eyes were so bright. Izuku thought back to when that photo had been taken. It had been a normal day. Nothing too interesting had happened. But it was the first day off that Mom had gotten in weeks, and so they spent the entire day together. He remembered just how happy they had both been that day. He hadn't smiled like that in so long. The man spoke sadly as he talked about Izuku and his life. The Bakugos looked sad from what he could see. Auntie Mitsuki's eyes were red from crying, and Uncle Masaru rubbed small circles on her back in an attempt to comfort them. But it was Kaken that baffled Izuku. If you had asked him how he would have acted at his funeral a week ago, Izuku would say that he would be yelling and praising that he was finally gone, but he wasn't doing that. He wasn't doing much of anything really. It was hard to see exactly what his face looked like from where Izuku was hiding, but from his body language he looked almost regretful. But why would he be regretful? Wasn't this what he wanted, for Izuku to die? Shouldn't he be celebrating? The service ended shortly after that, and the small group dispersed. Honestly, Izuku was surprised so many people showed up. Granted, most of them were his mom's friends who must have still been in town from her funeral, but it was still nice of them to be there. The Bakugos began to leave too, with Kaken lagging behind just a bit. He walked slowly, dragging his feet and keeping his eyes on the ground, so it surprised Izuku when his head suddenly shot up and stared at where he had just been hiding. Did Kaken somehow see him? What if he did? What would he do? He was dead. Maybe he would think that he was going crazy, or that he was haunting him. The thought made Izuku snicker a bit. That would be hilarious, but he wouldn't do that. His plan at the moment was to lay low and try to figure out what was going on and then leave. Hopefully his mom would be willing to see him then. Izuku didn't have any trouble getting something to eat, which he was thankful for. He didn't know why, but he got it in his head that he needed to lay low as to not draw any attention to himself. It didn't really matter at this point, but if someone were to come up to him and ask him his name or for his ID or something, he would be in trouble, so better to just keep a low profile. Once he was finished eating, he knew that he didn't want to go back home, so he decided to go further into the city and wander a bit. What was the worst that could happen? Hours later, Izuku found himself on the roof of a random building that wasn't too hard to climb up. He didn't know why he was up here or what he was planning on doing, but here he was. As he walked through the streets, he kept on getting comments on how he was too young to be out this late and what would his mother think of him not being home. He didn't have to worry about that, not that they knew that. But Izuku was tired of all of the stares and comments, so he headed toward a less crowded part of town. It might not have been his best idea, but at least he was alone now. but that also meant that he had to deal with his thoughts and feelings as well. Izuku looked over the city from the roof. Even from here it was beautiful. He wasn't deep enough into the bad parts of the neighborhood to be worried, and he could still see the city lights. It was the perfect place. Tears prickled at his eyes, and he cursed under his breath. He was tired of crying. He felt like it had been constant waterworks since his mother's death, and he was just so tired. Of course, he couldn't really help it, but he could still be annoyed. His mind wandered until he got back to his fall, or rather jump. How freeing it had felt, how happy he was. He wanted to feel like that again. But he was worried that if he tried it, he would just be rejected again. Although, Izuku crawled up to the edge and stood up straight, looking down in anticipation. Even if he was rejected, he might still be able to see Mom, and that was worth it, wasn't it? And there was always the chance that it was a fluke last time. He took a deep breath in and began to lean forward until he suddenly heard a loud scream and scrambled back enough to fall off the other side and land on the roof on his butt. What had that been? From what he had saw, there wasn't anyone else around here, so who had screamed? A few weeks ago, Izuku's immediate reaction would be to go try and help and be a hero, but what was the point? He knew that he couldn't be a hero, he couldn't save anyone, he couldn't even kill himself. He was useless and would only be a burden to whoever was in trouble. The person screamed again, and their cries and begging echoed as they pleaded with their attacker to stop. From what he heard, it sounded like a girl was being attacked and no one else was around to help her. He should, but he was useless. WSNT. In an instant, Izuku found himself clambering down the fire escape, running as fast as he could to the girl's desperate cries. What was he doing? What could he possibly do? Not die. He was useless and would never be a hero. He knew that. He knew that he would never be able to be like All Might, and that hurt. But what if his bullies were right and he was only a burden to everyone around him? What if he showed up and just made things worse? Was he willing to take that risk? Another scream, and Izuku's mind was set as if his legs weren't already moving. Sure, he might be pathetic and powerless and weak, but he had to help. He had to at least try. The cries got louder as he ran, and he finally rounded an ally corner and found the crying girl being pinned to the wall by a guy who was 2 times her size and had a shark head. The girl saw him, and her eyes widened in pleading, begging him to please help her, and he was off. He didn't know what he was doing. His body had just moved on its own. He saw how desperate that girl was and knew that he couldn't just stand around and do nothing. It wasn't as if he could die anyway, and if he did, win-win. Sharkhead didn't even notice his arrival until Izuku hit him on the side of the head with a long pipe that he found on the ground. The hit didn't seem to faze him at all, but when he turned his attention to Izuku, his eyes were filled with rage at the interruption. Izuku was frozen. What could he possibly do? This was a mistake, and he should have just left and gotten someone who could actually help this poor girl. But the fact was that he didn't, and he was here, and he was the only one who could help her right now. He stared the shark guy straight in his eyes before he reeled back and smacked the pipe across his face, causing him to stumble away from the still crying girl. Izuku quickly jumped in front of her and whispered behind him for her to run away quickly. But either she couldn't hear him or she wasn't listening. Oh well, he had already gone this far. Might as well risk it all, right? He chucked the pipe at the shark guy and grabbed the girl's wrist and dragged her away as fast as he could. There was no way for him to know how fast that guy was. But his top priority was to get her to safety, so he wasn't really thinking about it. That was until he heard his growl and his loud footsteps growing closer and closer to them. Crap. Izuku stopped in his tracks and spun around to face the shark head guy. He whipped the girl around behind him and tried to push her away. What? Go. Something must have clicked because she finally started running away, and Izuku let out a breath. At least she was going to be okay. Him on the other hand. You little punk. Get your ass back here. The shark guy came barreling towards Izuku, and it was all he could do to dodge him as he ran at him. You let her get away. I'm going to kill you. Don't I wish you could. He mumbled under his breath and steeled himself for whatever fight this was about to be. Izuku was defenseless. He lost his pipe when he threw it at the guy, and he didn't have any other weapons on him. It also didn't help that he didn't know how to fight either. Too late for that though. The guy charged again, and Izuku jumped out of the way at the last second, causing him to ram straight into the side of a building. Izuku stared at the dazed shark guy. He really hadn't meant to do that. He couldn't stop himself from letting out a small laugh as he realized what had just happened, and this of course made Sharkhead even angrier. That was good. Anger made people stupid and reckless. If Izuku could keep on letting him hurt himself, then he might actually get out of this alive. Suddenly thankful that they were in a narrow ally, Izuku kept on trying to rile up the shark guy and getting him to run into wall after wall and take himself out. Of course, every plan had its flaws, and Izuku did end up stumbling on his own feet and getting thrown across the ally and into the opposite building. Ouch. Man, that hurt like a butt cheek on a stick. It wouldn't surprise him if he had at least one cracked rib from that throw alone. The guy was a lot stronger than he looked and was getting angrier by the minute. But fortunately, Izuku was smarter than he was. The fight continued on like this for a while. Izuku dodging and baiting him to hurt himself and slipping up every so often and narrowly avoiding being ripped apart. Like he wanted to die, sure, but that just sounded painful. Finally, the shark guy stood up after running to yet another building, and he swayed on his feet and panted loudly. He was finished. Izuku looked around quickly to see if there was anything around that he could use and saw a long plank of wood sitting against the side of the building he was standing in front of. Without a second thought, he snatched up the wood and ran at the attacker, still out of it from his last collision. It took him a minute to realize what was happening, and by the time he did, Izuku had already advanced upon him, and it was too late. He began to hit him with the piece of wood until he was sure that he was out, but hopefully not dead. After a quick check of his pulse, Izuku's anxiety eased, and he sighed. What had just happened? He looked around and made sure that they were alone. The girl who had been attacked seemed to take his advice and had ran good. His eyes drifted back to the limp body at his feet, and he nudged it with his shoe just to be sure that he was down. What was he supposed to do now? Call the police, and then tell them what? That a quirkless kid had beaten this man that was 3 times his size with a plank of wood. Yeah, like they'd ever believe that. Wait, oh no, no. No, he had just attacked somebody without a license. If he called the police and they saw him, then he might be charged with vigilantism. But wait, could he be charged with using his quirk illegally if he didn't have one? Or at least didn't use the one he might have? Could they even arrest a dead person? Better to not chance it. Izuku scrambled up another fire escape. Those seemed to be his go-to recently, and once he was sure that he wouldn't be seen, he pulled out the phone that he had borrowed off of the attacker. It was password protected, but luckily you didn't need a password to call the police. The phone dialed, and Izuku waited until the line picked up. The person gave their spiel, and Izuku quickly explained what had happened while trying to not hyperventilate as he spoke. It took a couple of tries to get across what had happened, but once it was clear, the lady on the phone assured him that some officers would be there in 5 minutes and to stay put until they arrived. Yeah, right. Once the phone call was ended, Izuku was going to throw the phone back to the ground for the guy, but realized that his fingerprints were all over it. But he was dead, so how did that work? It didn't matter. He chastised himself. He tried his best to wipe off any fingerprints off of the phone with his hoodie, and then threw the phone on the roof and stomped on it just to make sure that it was broken. The attacker probably didn't need it anymore anyway. With the phone broken, Izuku looked over the other side of the building hoping to find a dumpster, and it seemed as if the universe was shining upon him for once in his life. He chucked the broken phone into the open dumpster and smiled as it clattered in and broke some more. He then thought that it was probably time for him to bounce. But how he was going to do that exactly ... he didn't know. Izuku could climb down the other fire escape and try to blend in with the people on the street, but what if one of the officers saw him trying to run away? That wouldn't be good. On both sides of him were more and more rooftops that were fairly equal in height and close together. What if he? No, that was crazy. Only someone who was completely reckless and had no regard for their life would. Oh yeah, this was it. Izuku didn't know if it was the thrill or the possibility of him dying or just him being actually crazy. But as he walked back as far as he could go, he laughed and continued to do so as he ran full speed toward the edge of the roof and jumped. It was insane. Just the thought to even attempt something like this, but oh was it fun. Izuku landed on the next roof, falling face first onto the concrete but landing nonetheless. He shot up with a wide smile on his face. That was so fun. He wanted to do it again. And so he did. As he did it more, he got slightly better. Maybe he should invest in a Parker class or something, because no matter how good he got, he still landed on his face every time. But Izuku didn't mind. He had been through much worse. His legs and lungs burned as he ran and jumped from building to building. The adrenaline pumping through his system helped to dull it though. Even the few times he almost didn't make the jump or barely avoided stumbling off the edge was drowned in the pure ecstasy that he was feeling as he ran freely. Izuku was completely entranced as he ran and didn't notice when another figure joined him in his little free run at first. It wasn't until he clipped his shoe on the edge of a roof that he noticed the person beside him, and his smile faded. Who was that? What did they want? Was he in trouble? What if they had seen what he did and was here to capture him? Adrenaline was replaced by anxiety, and Izuku missed his footing as he tried to land on the next building, sending himself tumbling across the roof. Izuku rolled over with a groan to see the figure landing gracefully and silently and couldn't help but gawk at them. How were they so good at that? Would Izuku be able to be that good? Slowly the figure walked over to him and bent down as they stood over him. The night was dark, and so it was hard for Izuku to see exactly who it was, but there was a street lamp close so that he could see enough. Long dark hair fell around the figure's face and dark, tired eyes stared at him questioningly. Izuku knew this person, but how? He took in the rest of their outfit to try to figure it out. They were in a black jumpsuit that was baggy but fit them at the same time, with a yellow utility belt around their waist that matched the yellow goggles that hung around their neck on top of what looked like a large gray scarf. Oh my god. Eraserhead. Izuku's eyes widened as he recognized one of his all-time favorite heroes. Eraserhead was an underground hero that almost nobody knew about, but Izuku had been obsessed with him because he fought almost completely quirkless. Not to mention that he was just so freaking cool. The hero's face scrunched in confusion as he continued to look at Izuku. Yeah. Oh my gosh. It's really you. You're really here and you were jumping across the rooftops with he and you saw oh no. You saw me absolutely eat it. Izuku slapped his hands over his now blushing face as he realized just how embarrassing that was. Great job, Izuku. Of course you would make a complete idiot of yourself in front of your favorite hero. Just like the useless Deku you are. He probably thinks that you're such a loser for wiping out on that jump that was so easy. Gosh dang it. Kid Eraserhead cleared his throat and looked away. He probably couldn't stand to look at such a failure. Are you alright? That was quite the fall. Izuku's face burned even hotter in embarrassment. Oh, why yeah, I'm good. Sorry you had to ... see that. Slowly, Izuku stood up and stared at the ground so that he didn't have to see the hero's disappointed look on his face. There was a small chuckle that was quickly covered up with a cough. Nah, you're good. It happens to the best of us. But, what are you doing running across rooftops in this part of town? Isn't it a bit past your bedtime? This caused Izuku to look up and glare at the smirking hero. The glare only lasted a second before he dropped it and went back to avoiding eye contact. Just having fun and enjoying the views. What about you? He chanced a peek at the hero's expression and found it unimpressed as if he could see right through Izuku. I'm a hero. It's kind of my job to patrol these roofs. Right. Stupid dumb idiot. Well, I'd better be going. It was nice to meet you, Eraserhead. Izuku let out a nervous chuckle and turned to run away from this disaster as fast as he could. Unfortunately, he instead found himself wrapped up in something that Eraser was holding and oh my gosh. This is your famous capture weapon that you use to both apprehend and fight villains. The fabric isn't as hard as I thought that it'd be, but I guess for it to move as fluidly as it does, it has to be at least a little flimsy, but then how is it so strong and sturdy? Whoa kid, I'm going to need you to slow down. Izuku hadn't even realized that he had been rambling and quickly snapped his mouth shut. If he had done that in front of Kaken or any of his classmates, they would have screamed at him and then pulled him aside after school to teach him a lesson. What if it annoyed Eraser like it did everyone else? He already probably hated him for having to watch him make such a fool out of himself, and this would just be the cherry on top. Maybe that's why he stopped him, because he found him too much of a burden to roam the streets and wanted to arrest him or something. Izuku felt like crying, and he could feel the familiar burning feeling in the back of his throat, but he refused to cry. He was tired of crying in general, but he would not cry like a baby in front of his favorite hero. So, his expression shut off completely instead. This caused the fabric around him to loosen a bit as Eraser faltered at the change in Izuku's face. The hero's eyes turned concerned in an instant and he took a step closer. Hey, are you okay? Izuku wanted to answer, but he knew that if he did then he'd probably cry. Although, not answering wasn't much better. He was worrying Eraserhead unnecessarily and he couldn't even apologize for burdening him without breaking down. God, he really was a failure. Kid. A hand snapped in front of his face and Izuku allowed himself to glance at the hero beside him. Hey, what just happened? Swallowing the last bit of his emotions, Izuku closed his eyes and took a breath. Nothing, but I really do need to be getting home. He somehow managed to wiggle out of the loose capture weapon and began to literally run away. While wait, Eraser's calls behind him were getting louder as he assumed that the hero ran after him. But he ignored it. He had already caused enough trouble tonight and he really didn't want to cause any more, especially for Eraserhead. So, he ran. It wasn't a secret that Eraser was faster and better at this than he was, but Izuku was still pretty speedy. He was also small and slippery, and he knew that he could escape from him. After all, he had plenty of practice. Guess all those years of running and hiding from his classmates were finally going to pay off. Too bad he had to run away from one of his favorite heroes. But what if he started to ask questions? What was he going to say? Yeah, my name is Izuku Midoriya. You know, that kid that committed suicide last week. That's me. Oh, also I'm alive. Bye. Yeah, no, that wouldn't go over very well. He knew as he clumsily landed on the third building over that he wouldn't be able to outrun this. He knew that from the start, but it was a lot more prevalent now. He needed a way to slip away, but how? That would work. It was Izuku's favorite thing, a fire escape, and a small one that a grown man would have trouble navigating quickly while trying to catch a small child ... well, teenager. It was Izuku's best bet and only real idea at the moment, so he just decided to go with it. Izuku took a sharp right turn halfway across the roof and shot towards the fire escape. Once he got there, he quickly maneuvered his way through all of the pipes and poles that bordered the edge and began to sprint down the rickety stairs. About halfway down, Izuku jumped over the hand railing and tried his best to grab on top a steady branch of the tree that was right next to him. He grabbed on a little too early and ended up falling a bit further down than he originally planned, but managed to catch a branch anyway and shimmied his body onto it and near the base of the tree so that it would be harder for him to be spotted. Eraser would wonder why the noise of him clattering down the escape stopped and start to look around. He just hoped that the leaves protected him from the hero's watchful eyes. He held his breath and the hero tried to sneak his way down the stairs and figure out where he had gone. Izuku had to admit it, even though he already knew, but Eraserhead was good. He searched places that Izuku hadn't even thought of hiding and scanned the area carefully before letting out a curse and jumping to the ground to start looking around the building. Not good enough apparently, Izuku smirked. Once he was absolutely positive that the hero was gone. He climbed his way down the tree and ended up on his back, of course, with the breath knocked out of him. He really needed to get better at this kind of stuff ... if he was going to stay alive. The walk home was quiet, and a little nerve-wracking considering that Izuku kept on looking over his shoulder, positive that Eraserhead had somehow found him and was following him. But that was ridiculous, right? As he walked through the streets he couldn't help but run his hand through his hair, a nervous habit he picked up sometimes when he was particularly stressed about something. Wait, hands ... hair ... ERASERHEAD now knew what he looked like. Izuku's nerves eventually calmed when he got home and wiggled through the window that he left unlocked. Home sweet home. Shout aside as he walked through the doors of the police station. How could he lose a child? A child? He really was pathetic, wasn't he? What's got you so mopey, Eraser? A teasing voice asked as he sat down in the seat opposite them. Not now. Tsukachi Shouter rubbed circles on the sides of his temples in an attempt to relax himself, but not succeeding in the slightest. Another sigh and then Eraser slammed his back against the back of the chair. I met a kid tonight. Ooh, how interesting. You're not usually one to take interest in anyone, let alone a child. It wasn't Tsuki was just teasing him, Shouta had to remind himself. Wow, he really needed to calm down. I don't think it was like that exactly. The kid was just interesting to say the least. His friend sat up in his chair and rested his elbows on his knees. Do tell. Aizawa rolled his eyes. I don't know. I was patrolling and out of the corner of my eye I see this tiny figure flying across the rooftops, so I obviously go to investigate and find out it's this kid in an All Might hoodie. The kid is just free running across the rooftops like it's no big deal, and then he saw me and freaked out or something because he completely ate it. Well, that's certainly one way to make an impression. Yeah, so anyway, then the kid starts rambling about me and my capture weapon like he was a fan, which I don't understand, but whatever, and then his entire demeanor just shifted. What do you mean? When I asked him why he was running across the rooftops in that neighborhood, he dodged the question and then totally shut down. The detective hummed thoughtfully. That is interesting. The two of them thought in silence until Tsuki finally decided to break it. So what are you going to do about it? What? The kid. What are you going to do about him? The question shocked Shouta. What was he going to do? What was he even supposed to do? It wasn't exactly like children were his forte. Nothing. He glanced at his friend's confused expression and rolled his eyes once more. It's not like he's my responsibility. I already have an entire class full of problem children that I have to deal with. I can't just add a random kid off the street to my load. He sat back in his chair and rubbed at his dry eyes. Don't look at me like that. Like what? Tsukachi tried and failed to look innocent as he smirked slightly at Aizawa, who narrowed his eyes at him. You know exactly what. It's that look you give me when you think that you know better than me. Well, don't I? No, and whatever you're thinking, you're wrong. Plus, what are the odds that I'd ever even see him again? Probably zero. Tsukachi's smirk just widened as he watched Shouta with amused eyes. You're doing that thing. What thing? The thing you do when you're trying to rationalize not caring about something. You can try to keep up your whole I couldn't care less about anything act, but I know you, Shouta. I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't do that. Sure. Oh, and when you see the kid again, tell him hi for me. Shouta glared at his friend, who was barely able to keep himself from bursting out with laughter, and just decided that it would be a better idea to just leave before he could tease him anymore. If Tsuki was right, which, as much as he hated to admit it, was more often than not, then Shouta sure had his work cut out for him. Great. Izuku was exhausted, but what else was new? He didn't even do all that much today, but he was still just as tired as when he'd woken up, maybe even more so. He slipped into his apartment and plopped down face first on the couch, and before he knew it, he was out. The next morning, he would wake up only slightly better rested than the night before, which was extremely annoying. But what could you do? Izuku took the time to take inventory of all of the things he had. Some clothes, a few pictures, mom's bowl, some money, and his phone and laptop, both of which were dead and couldn't be charged because they had cut off their power since no one was supposed to be living there. Not a lot, but better than it could be. He was just thankful that the orphanage hadn't decided to take any of his stuff for their own or broken anything when they threw it out. It was the little things. Then, Izuku decided to take advantage of the daylight trickling throughout the apartment to clean it up a bit. He didn't have much to do so with, but he could at least wipe some things down and do a little sweep. The moving company hadn't taken much of the cleaning stuff. Maybe they had thought that the next people to move in could use it or something. By the time he was finished, the place smelled clean and felt a lot better. It made Izuku happy. This was absolutely something Mom would have done, and the thought of her cleaning away at a supposed vacant apartment made him smile softly. The thought only lasted a moment before his smile faded again. What was he supposed to do now? Ugh, who knew that being dead would be this boring? Izuku looked out the window at the city that was just switching over to the nighttime. Streetlights were turning on, the sun was setting, and people were making their way home to their families. It was beautiful and sad at the same time. It was no secret that he was still tired and could probably sleep for another day or two, but Izuku was tired of sleeping. He needed to do something, to get out and move. And if he just so happened to fall off of a building in the process, then there's really nothing that you can do, is there? A quick change into some comfortable clothes and Izuku was out of the window and down the fire escape. The night was still a bit chilly, so he stuck with the hoodie idea, only deciding to go with a black one this time around and some black joggers to round out the blend in with the night look. As he made his way through the city, he put his hood up, just on the off chance that somebody could recognize his hair, and slipped on a black face mask to cover the lower half of his face. Not that he was particularly worried about someone calling the police and trying to explain that they saw a dead kid walking around. But better to not take any chances. It took a second for Izuku to end up back where he was the night before, but once he got there, he couldn't help but smile at the race of his heart. This was going to be so much fun. This was it. This was the feeling that Izuku loved. Maybe it was the wind in his hair, or the burn in his legs, or maybe it was the thrill of doing something dangerous again. But he couldn't help laughing as he jumped over the gaps in between the tall buildings. For this short amount of time, he felt like he could let everything else in his life fall away. He could forget about all of the crap that he's had to deal with in his current dumpster fire of a home life. He could just focus on running and trying not to fall. It almost made him happy to be. No, that wasn't it. This was just a good distractor. That's all. Well, at least it was until Izuku stopped short at the sound of commotion somewhere a building over. Maybe he underestimated how safe this area was, because this would be the second time he had run into an altercation of some sort here. It was honestly getting annoying. It was just as he had expected. Some thugs were ganging up on a scrawny man who looked scared out of his wits. 3-on-1 didn't seem very fair, but Izuku guessed that those kinds of things didn't matter to people like that. He would know. The three thugs looked tough, each of them large and well-built. It would be difficult for him to take on all of them, even with the element of surprise. Izuku really should go get someone who would be better suited to handle this kind of situation. Bang, bang. Gunshots sounded and echoed through the alleyway. Izuku had just begun to walk away to find someone else to help, but froze mid-step. Stupid Deku, you really think that you can be a hero? You're just a quirkless weakling. How do you expect to fight villains if you won't even fight me? Look at him flinch. What? Are you scared of Bakugo? How pathetic. A quiet ringing filled his left ear, a phantom of the injury he had received from Kaken. His limbs locked up as his heart began to race. This was a new feeling. Izuku knew just how powerful and scary Kaken's quirk could be, but he had never been this afraid of it, had he? Memories of explosions going off in his face and beating him until he was almost unconscious on the ground swirled in his head. This was a lot. He didn't think that those times that Kaken and his lackeys had ganged up on him had affected him that much, but maybe he was wrong. Another shot shook him from his thoughts, and Izuku could see the scrawny man cowering on the ground in a ball. Warning shots, to scare the victim into submission. The three thugs laughed and made fun of the man as if they weren't the ones who were hurting him. It was wrong. He didn't deserve that. No one deserved to be beaten up and treated like dirt. Someone had to help. It was stupid. It was reckless. It was dangerous. But then again, when had that ever stopped Izuku before? He clambered down to the ground as quickly as he could, pulling his hood up in the process, and pounced on the thug closest to him. He jumped onto his back and held on for dear life. Did he know what he was doing? No. Did he have literally any experience in fighting or defending himself? Also no. But he did have a lot of experience with not dying, and that had to count as something. It didn't take long for Izuku to be thrown off of the thug's back and onto the ground. He landed on his shoulder and rolled a few times, but eventually stopped with a groan. The impact hurt like a witch, but he had worse. Plus, now the three thugs were distracted, and if the other guy was smart enough, he could easily run away and get help. But of course, when had people ever lived up to Izuku's expectations? He just sat on the ground, staring wide-eyed at the thugs approaching Izuku, and did nothing. It took Izuku glaring at him and discreetly gesturing for him to go that he finally got up and ran out of the alley. All right, that was good. Izuku's objective was complete. Now all he had to do was find a way to escape himself. Well guys, it's been nice chatting, it really has, but I think that it's about time that I get going. Izuku got up from the ground and made an attempt to bolt the opposite way that the other guy had gone. But he was caught by the back of his hoodie and yanked backwards. Oh no, you don't. You think you can just fall out of the sky and attack me and get away with it? The guy he jumped on held him up so that his tiptoes barely touched the ground. I was hoping. He gave his best innocent smile, but it did nothing against the three. Okay then, plan B it was. He stuck his arms straight up and slid out of the hoodie that was too big for him easily and scrambled away as soon as he was free. It took the thug a minute to realize what had just happened, but when he did his eyes flashed red. That couldn't be good. But it would have been so interesting if Izuku hadn't been in such a dire situation. Was that a part of his quirk? Was it linked to his emotions or just anger? Did his quirk have something to do with his eyes or was that just an extra detail? Maybe wait, not the time. The thug tossed his hoodie to the side and Izuku's expression frowned. That was his third favorite hoodie. Rude. All three of them were now glaring at him and Izuku got into a sloppy battle stance. He knew that he probably couldn't run away. And he definitely knew that he couldn't beat them, but he could most likely survive them killing him, so that was something. He was surprised when all three of them rushed him at once. Usually, villains fought one at a time. It was a stupid tactic, but one that most heroes were able to take advantage of. But apparently, these guys were smarter than he had thought. Izuku had just been able to weasel his way out of them surrounding him, but was met with a fist to the face when he tried to get further away. Since when had that guy been there? Teleportation quirk. How did it work? Vision-based. Or maybe he had to know where he was teleporting. Ugh, not the time, Izuku. He staggered as his vision faded in and out and his cheek throbbed where he had been punched. Okay, not too bad, but not the worst. He could take more. The one who had hit him ran at him again and Izuku dodged easily only to be shoved to the ground a second later. Oh yeah, this guy was getting annoying, but how could he combat a quirk like? That was when Izuku noticed the gun that was right in front of his face. The guy he had jumped on smirked when he saw him stiffen and smirked as he cocked the gun. How had he forgotten the gun? Oh my, he was an idiot. That was the only logical explanation. Not so cocky now, huh? This was bad. I mean, he would probably survive a bullet to the brain, but that couldn't be comfortable. And just imagine the kind of scar that would leave. He'd have to get really creative to explain that one away. Okay, and no need to be so hasty, guys. This is all just a huge misunderstanding, and I'm sure we can work this out. The gun was pressed against his forehead and the three guys smiled sadistically. No, I don't think that we will. Sorry, kid. This was it. This was going to happen. Alright then, I guess I'll see you soon, Mom. Hope you're happy to see me this time. Izuku shut his eyes and braced for the fire, but it never came. With his eyes scrunched closed, he couldn't see what had happened, but he heard what he hoped was the gun clattering as it fell to the ground along with a few grunts, and the thug in front of him swore. He opened his eyes cautiously and his mouth dropped at what he saw. The guy in front of him was restrained and lying on his side with a look of annoyance on his face while his two friends were unconscious. Slowly, Izuku followed what the guy was restrained with to a very done-looking Eraserhead. Izuku let out a nervous laugh and tried to smile. Hi, Eraser. Hi, problem child. Fancy seeing you here, huh? At this, Eraser just raised his eyebrow and Izuku internally grimaced. That's a new look for you. What do you think you're doing? Izuku moved to sit cross-legged because he knew if he tried to stand up, he'd probably fall due to how all of his limbs felt like jelly. He was glad that he covered his head and mouth. It would be harder to recognize him now, and he also felt kinda cool and mysterious with this whole secret identity thing. Not to mention that like 60% of his facial expressions were covered, so it was easier for him to hide his emotion. Well, I was planning on getting shot, but you kinda interrupted that, so don't joke. You could have been seriously hurt or killed. Taking on three guys twice your size, really? Do you even know how to fight? Eraserhead just sighed as Izuku refused to meet his eyes. A clear answer to his question. It was as if he was having an internal struggle with what to say. The hero was not known for showing a lot of emotion, but even in the tiny changes of his expression, Izuku could guess all of the things he was feeling. You know what? Stay. He turned to the thug on the ground that was under his shoe and quickly knocked him out so that he couldn't attempt to fight or run away. I have to get these guys down to the station, but I will be right back. Do not go anywhere. Was he serious? He wasn't Izuku's dad. He couldn't tell him what to do. Did he seriously think that he would obey? As if Eraser could read his thoughts, he glared at Izuku and activated his quirk, which was terrifying. His eyes glowed a threatening shade of crimson and his hair floated upwards and away from his face. A built-in mechanism of his quirk. That was so cool. His quirk relied on sight. And it would be a problem if his hair kept on falling in his face, so the fact that his hair levitated when he activated it was amazing. Not the time, Izuku. It didn't take him long to realize why Eraserhead was one of the most respected and feared heroes of the underground. He was terrifying. The glare was enough to glue Izuku to the ground and make him never want to move again. Not that his jelly legs would let him anytime soon. Once Eraser was sure that Izuku was properly scared, he blinked, deactivating his quirk, and began to wrap all three thugs in his capture weapon and dragged them out of the alley. Well, crap, he was really out here. Shout aside as he dragged away the three thugs that the problem child had been fighting. When he had passed where they were, it had taken him a moment, but once he caught a glimpse of the kid's eyes, He knew exactly who it was. Those eyes were impossible to forget. He didn't even know how the kid had managed to piss off 3 random guys so much that they were pointing a gun at his head. But what really bothered him was how calm he was when he showed up. He had been patrolling and heard some scuffling and decided to check it out just in case. That was when he caught a glimpse of the kid's telltale green curls and the 3 guys threatening him with a gun. And the kid had just sat there, as if waiting for them to pull the trigger like he didn't care. But that couldn't be the case, right? The station doors slid open as a racer approached, and Saavaage was not surprised to see 3 unconscious criminals being carted around by a very tired-looking Aizawa. He stepped away from his desk and joined his friend as he lugged his cargo to the interrogation rooms. "Hi, Eraser, nice catch of the day." "They're not my catch actually." The statement surprised Suki at least a bit, but not nearly as much as Eraser's mood. Usually, the underground hero was reserved and apathetic, but tonight he just seemed annoyed and tired, more so than usual. Saavaage jogged to keep up and looked Aizawa in the eye. "What's up? Did someone try to offer you hobo money again?" "Well, no. Then what has you so pissed?" Eraser waited for Tsuki to open the door to one of the interrogation rooms and then left the 3 criminals to 2 other officers who were standing nearby. "Remember that kid I was talking about the other night? The one who was roof jumping?" The detective thought for a moment. Even though he knew exactly who they were talking about, he just liked to tease his friend and cause him as much trouble as he causes him. "Oh yeah, you mean the one that you swore you'd never run into again? Did you tell him hi for me?" "It didn't come up." Eraser gave him a tired look. "Anyway, I found him fighting these guys in an alley. Didn't you say he was just a kid? Against these 3... he must have some guts." "Oh, he has something all right. When I showed up, he had a gun pressed to his head and the kid didn't even flinch." This was new. Usually, Aizawa wasn't one to get attached too quickly, but from what Saavaage could tell, this kid had him caught like a worm on a hook. It was interesting to watch. "Where is he now?" "I left him in the alley. Alone? And you expect him to just sit there like a good child?" "Well, I'm pretty sure that I scared him enough for him to stay put, but even if I didn't, the universe seems to want to make me suffer and will probably keep on putting him in my path. So it's only a matter of time until I see him again. Most likely getting himself into another fight, but you know." The detective smiled to himself and held in a laugh. "Well, it looks like you've got your work cut out for you. Children are a lot of work. Are you sure you're ready to be a dad?" "I'm not a dad. I am a teacher and hero, and it's my job to protect people. He just so happens to fall under that category and is a child." Sure, just keep telling yourself that." This time he couldn't help but start laughing at the glare he was getting from him friend who started walking away. "And I'm serious. Tell him I said hi. Maybe bring him by the station sometime." "Oh, I'm sure you'll be seeing him soon one way or another." Shouta exited the station after filling out some quick paperwork and began to make his way back to the alley that he left that kid in. There was no way that he was still there, right? But what if he was? What was he going to do? If Eraser was honest, he hadn't thought this far. The only things he really had thought of were protecting the kid and getting those thugs away from him. He wished that the universe didn't have a sense of humor, because even though he had just met the kid, he knew that he was going to be a handful and one that only he could deal with. When he got to the mouth of the alley, he saw a bush of curly green hair sitting cross-legged on the ground humming to himself. "Wow, the kid actually, I'm not that scary, am I?" "Hey," Aizawa called out. Izuku's head shot up and he looked at the hero who had come back just as he had said. That was a new one for him. "Oh, what's up, Eraser? I would have thought that you would have run by now." "Hey, I've got nothing else better to do when this alleyway is peaceful." Shouta's brows furrowed. "You mean the alleyway that you were just fighting 3 thugs and being threatened with a gun in?" "Yep. Wow, yeah, definitely a handful. What have you been doing while I was gone?" The kid hummed, still sitting on the ground when Shouta joined him. "Nothing really, just thinking, I guess." Aizawa could count on one hand how many children he had met that were as low maintenance as this one appeared to be. He was saying that in the maybe 30 to 45 minutes he was gone, he just sat here alone with nothing to do or look at and just thought, "That sounds lonely." "Yeah," he let out a singular huff of a laugh, "but I dunno, I'm just kinda used to it at this point." Well, that didn't sound good. No child should ever have to be used to being alone. Where were this kid's parents? Shouta wanted to ask, but something told him that that was a very sensitive subject and that he should tread lightly. So, he filed that away for later and just settled for being with the kid instead. "Me too. Being an underground hero can get pretty lonely, but I make sure to surround myself with people that I care about and trust so that I don't ever feel too alone. It's nice to know that you have people that you can fall back on when everything gets to be too much." Izuku stiffened slightly but tried his best to not show it. He knew how observant Eraserhead was, so he doubted that he had missed the change, but he didn't say anything, so there was that. If Izuku was honest, he hadn't ever really thought of Eraser as the type to have friends, but he guessed that everyone had to have someone. It's not good for people to be alone and have to deal with all of the crap life dishes out by themselves. "I didn't take you to be the friend type." This won a small chuckle from the hero sitting beside him as he tried to hide his slight smile and his capture weapon wrapped around his neck. That's fair. I guess I'm really not. But as I got older, I realized that I couldn't do everything alone. And some people are more tolerable than others. But of course those aren't the people that I found. Eraser rolled at his eyes at what Izuku assumed to be the thought of some of his friends. What about you? Do you have any friends? Shouta instantly knew that he'd messed up. As soon as the question left his mouth, the kid's face darkened, and whatever sense of comfortability they had was lost as the kid shut down. I'm sorry, I didn't. I should go. It was like a slap in the face. When the kid spoke, the words were robotic and cold. He left no room for argument, and Aizawa was too thrown back to even try as he watched him leave the alleyway with no other words. Eraser cursed under his breath and rubbed at his temples. This was going to be a long journey with this kid, wasn't it? It wasn't until 2 nights later that Shouta caught a glimpse of that troublesome green hair again. It seemed as though the kid had given up on trying to keep the hood that was way too big for his head up. Eraser would often find himself actively searching for his newest problem child, even without meaning to. He continued to patrol the same area and kept to the roofs and alleys where he knew he would most likely find the kid getting into a scuffle or running away from a fight. It was a week until the kid started talking to him again, which was a good thing. Aizawa was beginning to get worried that he had seriously touched a nerve, but one night when he was roof jumping, he heard a young voice taunt him from below. He jumped down to where he was, and as soon as he touched the ground, the little gremlin was saying some comment that he knew would push his buttons. Shouta thought that he probably did it to distract from the criminal that was unconscious behind him. But he was honestly just happy that he was hearing the kid's voice again. The next couple of months continued like that. Eraser would patrol and run into the problem child getting into mischief. The two would talk and hang out for a bit before they went their separate ways. In their free time when the streets were supposedly crime-free, Shouta would train the kid. It wasn't his first choice, but after watching him risk his life every time he went out due to inexperience and sloppy form, Eraser decided that if he was going to continue to see this kid, he might as well teach him how to not die properly. 3 months after he had met the kid was when he finally made his official debut. Honestly, with the number of times Shouta found him fighting random criminals in alleyways, he was surprised he wasn't found out sooner. But one night Aizawa was perching on a roof looking out for some trouble or his gremlin and heard commotion to his right followed by police sirens. When he arrived at the scene, the kid was facing off with a criminal with some sort of skin armor quirk in the middle of a busy street. The kid barreled towards the criminal and tackled him to the ground. How he had managed to do that with how small he was, Shouta didn't know. The two went down and rolled a bit until the kid was sitting on top of the criminal punching until he finally knocked him out. By that time the police had arrived, and the kid scrambled away before he could be caught. Not before some videos and pictures were taken, however. That was how Serpentine was born. Apparently, a reporter had witnessed the entire thing and had talked with some witnesses and decided to name this new vigilante. Shouta thought that the name was pretty accurate. When he saw the kid, the only thing that really stood out were his startling green eyes and the way he moved so fluidly even though he was clearly still inexperienced. Not to mention how slippery he was when he wanted to be. Oh, and how could he forget those obnoxious red shoes? He had only ever seen the kid in one pair of shoes. Did he not own any others? Maybe some that weren't as loud and noticeable? The night after when he met up with the kid, he was freaking out. According to him, the guy he had knocked out on the ground referred to him as Serpentine and mentioned the article that the kid quickly read through when the job was done. It surprised Eraser just how opposed he was to being known. Most vigilantes he had met wanted to be seen and noticed, especially younger ones. Hey, Shouta attempted to try and calm the kid down. But he was too far gone at this point to do anything but listen. The kid paced back and forth, a constant stream of muttered words leaving his mouth as he moved. What am I supposed to do? I wasn't even supposed to become a vigilante, but I guess that it was inevitable with all of the fighting I've been doing lately, but does that even count? Well, according to everyone else, I am now an official vigilante, and that means that I'm a criminal, and that can't be good because the law is good most of the time, and I'm going against the law that's there to protect people, but I'm also protecting people, so what does that even mean at this point? Eraser really tried his best to follow all that he was saying, but it got difficult at times because he tended to backtrack and contradict himself. It was only logical considering this was probably his actual thought process at the moment, and thoughts aren't exactly the most coherent and easy to follow things. After another few minutes of constant muttering, Aizawa had finally had enough and moved to stand in the way of the kid's pacing. He almost didn't notice the person standing in front of him until he nearly ran into him and cut off his stream of words as he stumbled back. Kid, you've got to stop. The kid's eyes saddened, and something flickered in them before Shouta could tell exactly what it was. I am sorry. I know that my muttering is annoying and creepy. It's just a nervous habit that I've always had, and I thought that I had it under control. But I'm really sorry if I made you uncomfortable or irritated by it. I'll make sure to not. Whoa, who said that I was upset with you? The kid paused as if to really soak in what Shouta just said and looked back at him with confused eyes. You mean you're not upset with me? You don't find me annoying or anything? Eraser just looked at the kid for the longest time. This was a completely different person than he had known for the past couple of months. It was as if he had two sides of his personality and certain circumstances brought out each one. It actually reminded Aizawa a bit of the time when the kid had freaked out or shut down around him. Usually that was a coping mechanism and a result of trauma. And that didn't sit right with Eraser. No, that doesn't. Why would I shout? Has stopped. This was obviously a sensitive subject, and if he dug too deep the kid might shut down again. He had to be cautious and treat this with care. What I meant was that you've got to stop worrying. Yes, people now know who you are. Well, relatively at least, and that might not be exactly how you wanted things to go, but there's nothing we can do about it now. It is illogical to harp on things that we cannot control. It will only cause us more problems rather than solving them. Oh, and as far as the whole vigilante thing goes, what did you expect to happen when you go around beating up criminals without a license? The kid looked down and Shouta could see the faintest trace of a blush under his black face mask. I was hoping to stay invisible, just take criminals down from the shadows and without bothering anybody. Well, I hate to tell you this, but that's almost impossible to do. You are going to be figured out sooner or later. Yeah, but now everybody is labeling me a vigilante, and sure, I was doing acts of vigilantism, but now it's, I dunno ... real. The kid sighed and rubbed the sides of his temple as if fighting off a headache. Serves him right for being such a headache for Shouta. This whole situation was strange, and Aizawa was really trying his best to take it slow and one step at a time. But he was getting irritated with walking on eggshells. That wasn't who he was, but he also didn't want to drive the kid away. Gah, such a headache. If it bothers you so much, then why not just get a proper license? Suddenly the kid's head shot up and his eyes bore into Shouta's. No, his eyes steeled as the word left his mouth. What do you mean no? The kid didn't break eye contact as he began to back away slowly, and Shouta didn't realize what he was going to do until he started sprinting away from him and calling back to him as he ran. I'm sure you've got that one for me, right? And then he was gone. Izuku was so stupid. Somehow, he had managed to attract the attention of Eraserhead and even got him to train him a bit, which Izuku was very against at first, but after he assured him over and over again that he wouldn't be a burden, he finally agreed. And now he had tricked him into believing that he could be a hero. Why not just get a proper license? Like it was that easy. He said it as if Izuku wasn't useless and a bother to everyone around him. The only reason why he was even sticking to this whole vigilante thing was because he helped more people than he hurt. And don't even get him started on the meteor writing multiple articles on him and naming him Serpentine. When he had learned of what happened, he wanted to crawl into a dark cave and die there. How did he get the attention of people and convince them that he was a proper vigilante? Although technically that wasn't vigilantism, because the textbook definition of vigilantism is the illegal use of a quirk against a villain, and Izuku didn't have a quirk, or at least a useful one. So, was he now lying to everyone and tricking them into thinking that he was a capable vigilante when he wasn't even a real vigilante? Of course, it wasn't like he asked to be outed to the world, but he must have done something wrong. He always does. Izuku climbed through his apartment window and changed out of his vigilante gear. He had made some improvements in the past few months. He got a new black hoodie just for his vigilante work, and some black joggers that he found was gifted. The only issue was that they were a bit tighter than he wanted. They weren't too terrible, just more of leggings than joggers, but Izuku would take what he could get. Legally dead beggars can't be choosers. He had a black utility belt that held 2 pipes he was just learning how to use correctly with Eraserhead, a small knife that he found in one of the kitchen drawers, and some very basic first aid. Izuku didn't necessarily need it, but bleeding out when he wasn't dying was pretty annoying and messy, so he decided it was probably best to have some bandages on hand just in case. He also had a few more things to help any injured civilians he might find. And he still had the face mask covering his mouth and nose. But he found one that was a lot more breathable and ventilated so that he didn't feel like he was dying every time he decided to go for a bit of a roof hopping. As you do. And of course, he still wore his red shoes. The only other shoes he had were dress shoes that pinched his feet. Eraser had actually commented on his choice of footwear a few times. Izuku could tell he didn't really like them, that he probably thought that they were impractical and distracting, but he just couldn't bring himself to let them go. When he was little, he and Mom didn't have all that much money, but she would sometimes take him to the mall and let him pick out 1 or 2 things that he wanted to buy. He distinctly remembered this one time that he couldn't find anything that he really wanted until they passed the shoe store and saw these bright red sneakers in the window. Izuku was captivated and practically bounced as they stood in the checkout line of the store. He didn't know why he liked them so much, but his mother found it adorable and made sure to match him anytime she could by wearing something red. Sometimes she would end up looking like Christmas decided to come early. But he just loved that she was happy. The kids at school didn't like his shoes nearly as much as she did. But Izuku didn't care. Even though he felt guilty every time they had to buy a new pair because his classmates decided it would be funny to destroy or ruin his shoes, he just couldn't let them go. He kept wearing them, and eventually his classmates got bored and moved on to teasing him for something else. And the only other change he made to his costume was giving up on covering his hair and instead tying it back. His hoodies were always too big to keep the hood up, and it was annoying having to keep track of it during fights and stuff. But his hair was just as annoying. It kept on getting into his face and would frizz sometimes due to the humidity in the air. So Izuku just started to carry around hair ties, and it has done wonders, especially since his hair has been getting pretty long. Izuku decided that he would go out and shower in the morning after he got some sleep. You would think that after so much you'd stop being so tired. But unfortunately, tiredness has simply become a part of Izuku. He had a theory that it had something to do with him dying or whatever, but he couldn't really prove it until he managed to die again. Actually, that's not that bad of an idea. It had been a while since everything happened, and Izuku had thrown himself into saving those around him to distract from the whole still wanting to die thing. But maybe it had been long enough. Couldn't hurt to try, right? So, the next night when he went out, he had a set goal, unlike most nights. He still ended up getting mixed up in a few fights, but things like that just tended to drift to him. He didn't even seek it out. It was like he was a trouble magnet. And honestly, that probably wasn't too far off. It had been hours since he had left the apartment, and Izuku finally felt that he had some time to himself. After double and triple checking that no one needed help in the area around him, Izuku found himself on the edge of the tallest building in the neighborhood. He knows that the last time he tried jumping it didn't exactly work out, but it was a lot less messy than trying to find someone who would be willing to kill him, and who's to say that they wouldn't kill other people too? Better to not get anyone else involved. Izuku didn't trust himself with a gun, so that was out. A knife was too messy, pills were expensive, and he'd rather steal as little as possible. He didn't feel like finding any rope, and drowning just honestly didn't sound like a good time. Same thing with fire. Who knew that dying would be so much work? The night felt good. The air wasn't too cold or hot. The sky was clear, and this area didn't have too much light pollution, so Izuku could see some of the stars above him. He realized that he did this thing just before he jumped. He just looked out and took in everything around him one last time. It was like this last time as well. As crappy as the world was to him, it was pretty beautiful. Then came that feeling again, the feeling of free falling. No regrets, no hesitation, no worries, just release. In hope. The ground came quickly, and before he knew it, Izuku was plunged into darkness once again. Shouta knew that he was brooding as he patrolled, but he couldn't help it. Once again, he had upset the kid with something that he said, and now it was all he could think about. Who says no to being a hero? The kid is so excited about every hero he meets. I would have thought that he'd jump at the opportunity to become one. But he didn't just say no, he ran away. Why would he do that? Eraser could feel a headache coming on, which was no surprise at all considering who he dealt with on a nightly basis. Speaking of which, he hadn't actually seen the kid at all tonight. It was weird. Ever since he knew him, the kid hadn't taken a single night off from beating up thugs and criminals, and he always somehow found himself around Eraser. So what was going on? He took to looking a bit more closely as he ran across the rooftops. The area he was in was a bit different than his usual patrol. It wasn't too far away, but the buildings were a lot different. Everyone was unique, and that meant that roof hopping was a lot more challenging. Not that it was any issue for Eraser, but it might be to Serpentine, who was still fairly inexperienced. Shouta's eyes had become pretty attuned to that green hair. It blended in pretty well with the night, but it stood out just enough to Eraser. The kid looked like he was scanning the area around him. He was stood on the tallest building around, and it must have an amazing vantage point. He might want to check it out himself. He was about to call out to the kid when his heart stopped as he fell off of the edge. Kid! Shouta raced towards the falling child. He must have slipped or missed his footing or something, and he wasn't coordinated enough yet to correct himself. Oh no. Eraser pushed himself to move faster, but he knew that he wouldn't be fast enough, so he tried to use his capture weapon, but it hit the edge of another building and missed, causing Shouta to choke on his breath. By the time he reached the kid, it was too late. His small body laid at his feet, crumpled and unmoving. I wasn't fast enough. What was Shouta going to do? He had known this kid for a few months, and now he was dead right in front of him. He had been worried that this would happen. He just thought it would be in a different way. That's why he insisted on seeing him every night and training him when he could. But all of that was in vain now. Damn it. Sukachi agreed to meet him when Shouta called him. It was clear that his tone had set off alarms in his friend's head. But he couldn't bring himself to put up a front. He couldn't really bring himself to feel anything either. He was just numb. Stuff like this came with the job. You would think that Eraser would be used to it by now, but every time he found someone dead, he couldn't help but blame himself. If only he had been just a bit faster, stronger, better. If he hadn't been a second too late, then they might still be alive. He knew thinking like that was illogical. He was human, and he can't expect himself to be perfect. but that doesn't stop him from trying. You can't save everyone. He learned that at a young age, before he even graduated. It was a lesson he knew he'd never forget, and he didn't want to. It drove him to be better, to try harder. He still missed him every day though. The pain had dulled over the years, but it never truly goes away. Shouta had begun to be known for his uncaring attitude and coldness after that. It wasn't his fault. That was just how he coped. He shut himself down and refused to dwell on anything that wasn't hero work. Was it unhealthy? Yes, but that was how it was. He wasn't as closed off as people usually thought, but he refused to let himself get attached. Or at least, that what he told himself. Hey, footsteps sounded behind Eraser and he knew exactly who it was before they ever spoke up. The footsteps stopped just behind him, and he felt a firm hand on his shoulder as he sat by the body, blank. Oh, yeah, I found him seconds before. I was too slow. Saavaage knelt beside Shouta, never moving his hand on his shoulder that had become somewhat of an anchor for him, and examined the scene. I'm sorry, he was just a kid. I know. The two of them sat in silence for a few more minutes before Shouta's head finally cleared, and they both decided that they needed to get his body to the morgue and figure out who he was. The trip was easy, and when they dropped the kid off, Eraser refused to leave. He just wanted to be with him a little bit longer, and seeing his face would help them figure out who he was quicker and easier. Saavaage had no objection and sat beside Shouta as the two put in some discerning factors and began going through lists upon lists of names. It was harder than they both had initially thought. Sure, the kid looked rather plain, but surely there weren't that many green hair and green-eyed teenagers in Japan. Knowing some more things would have been a lot easier. But Eraser had never figured out the kid's quirk or even asked. He never saw him use it, so he suspected that it was probably a non-physical quirk. Hours passed and the two of them had come up with absolutely nothing. Shouta was getting frustrated and Tsuki kept on reminding him that the kid's body would need to be taken care of soon, which just put him in an even worse mood. Shouta had just agreed to leave and continue looking tomorrow after he got some sleep, and Saavaage was on the phone with the examiner telling her that she could come down when slight movement caught his eye. His head whipped to where he had seen it, but it was just the kid's body. Nothing was around that it could have been. But that didn't make sense. Eraser's senses were spot on and he knew that he's seen something, so what could it have? One moment the room was quiet and still, and then next the seemingly dead body shot up with a gasp and ended up falling onto the floor. What the F? Izuku felt terrible. 1. He was back here and that was great. 2. How could he somehow feel as healthy as a horse and like death incarnate at the same time? 3. He was still tired. How is that fair after he was just dead and literally doing nothing? Rigged. And lost TLY. He was pissed. When he went under, he didn't see his mom. He kept on going through his memories and reliving some of the worst moments of his life. It sucked. He saw a lot of Kaken and each time he hated him more. But it wasn't all hate. One of the memories he kept on going back to was when they were both children and Izuku insisted on being his friend and following him around no matter how many times he pushed him down. Izuku couldn't take a hint apparently. Those feelings of unwavering loyalty and admiration followed him throughout middle school, and that was probably why he let them treat him like that. And don't even get him started on all of the verbal, mental, and emotional abuse he endured every single day. He was a child, a bright-eyed and naive child who saw the best in everyone and refused to acknowledge the bad. No matter what Kaken put him through, he still stuck around. He somehow convinced himself that it was his fault that he was treated that was. But what could he have possibly done to be treated like that? And nobody did a thing. Izuku couldn't see it back then. He was too nice, too forgiving. But that Izuku was gone. They say that if you hear something enough you start to believe it even if you know it's not true. Well, now Izuku knew the truth. He could see it clearly. His bullies were wrong. And he wasn't going to let that fear run his life anymore. He continued to cough and suck in air as his body went back to actively keeping him alive. It was annoying how it had to relearn how to work every time he died. But what can you do? Ugh, I hate this stupid freaking quirk. He yelled in between coughs. Once he was finally able to breathe properly and didn't feel like he would pass out if he tried to stand, he pushed himself to his feet and froze. Eraserhead and someone else were standing on the opposite of the table he had been on, staring at him like he was a ghost. Although, to them, he probably was. Hey, you Eraser. The hero blinked and didn't make any attempt to close his mouth that was practically on the ground. This was going to be such a pain. You might want to close your mouth, you'll catch flies. Eraser slowly obeyed and scrutinized every inch of Izuku. It was as if he couldn't believe what was right in front of him. He started but couldn't seem to gather his thoughts enough to form a coherent sentence. That was to be expected, he supposed. You were dead. I saw you die. You did. Sorry about that. I try to not be a burden on anyone, but sometimes it's inevitable. You died. I held your body and checked for a pulse. You hadn't taken a single breath in hours. How are you alive? Izuku rubbed the back of his neck. It's kinda a long story, but short version is that I can't die apparently. The man standing beside Eraserhead hadn't said a thing so far, just gawked at Izuku and his conversation with Eraser, but something that he said must have jump-started his brain. I'm sorry, apparently. You mean that this is a new thing for you, not dying? Yeah, the first time didn't exactly work, and I thought that maybe it had been long enough, but… Wait, Eraser interrupted Izuku's rant, which was probably a good thing. They didn't need to know about all of that. The last time didn't work… Were you trying to kill yourself? Maybe this wasn't the best idea. The more they talked, the worse it seemed to get, and the angrier Eraser got. But three of them stood in silence for a few seconds as Izuku refused to meet either of the adults' scrutinizing eyes. It was Eraser who broke the tense silence. Kid, answer the question. His voice was low and dark. It wasn't hard to figure out that he was pissed. But about what? There were honestly so many possibilities Izuku just didn't even try to guess. No. False. The other guy finally spoke up again. His face was difficult to read, but he was clearly confused and upset. Dude, what the heck? Izuku couldn't believe the guy sold him out like that. Snitch. Oh my god, Eraser turned away and began to pace back and forth, rubbing his temples and mumbling to himself. Is that why you were running across the roof so recklessly? Because you were trying to kill yourself. Recklessly? Izuku didn't think he was being too reckless, but he was probably a bad judge considering his regard for his life was less than zero. No, I was doing it because it's fun and I felt good while doing it. He paused, debating whether or not to tell them the complete truth or not. The other guy was like a bloodhound when it came to lies apparently, so he should just say it before he went fishing. And if I happen to slip and die, then what's the harm? Oh my, do you hear yourself? What's the harm? You could have been killed or seriously injured, and that's a pretty big deal. He stared at Izuku with unbelieving eyes before something else flashed in them. Wait, is that why you didn't care the other night? You're going to have to be more specific. The other night, when those guys held a gun against your head, you didn't even flinch. This is why, because you just don't care. Eraser scoffed at Izuku's nonchalantness and went back to pacing as the other guy looked like he was trying to process everything they were saying and was losing. You see, Tsuki, do you see what a pain this problem child is? The other man cleared his throat and looked at Izuku warily, as if not knowing what to do in this situation. I'm not sure if you should use the words pain and problem to describe him, Shouta. It seems rather harsh. Oh, bite me. Eraser stayed on the other side of the room, mumbling angrily to himself while the other man stepped towards Izuku. I'm sorry about him. My name is Naomasa Tsukachi. I'm a detective on the police force and an old friend of Eraserhead. You must be Serpentine. He extended his hand with a small smile, one that could make even the most skeptical person comfortable. Izuku shook the detective's hand gingerly, a little bit uncomfortable with having someone with the police around. That's what they call me. Well, it's very nice to meet you, Serpentine. Do you mind if I ask you a few questions, just about tonight and what exactly happened? There was that smile again, but Izuku knew better. The name Tsukachi sounded familiar somehow, maybe someone in the hero industry that he came across once, but he couldn't remember what his quirk was. It put him on edge. Izuku resorted to shrugging rather than answering out loud and pulled a metal stool to sit on while the detective made himself comfortable leaning against the autopsy table. All right. He pulled out a small notebook from the pocket of his coat and flipped it open. Don't worry, I'm just taking notes to make sure I remember everything. You don't need to worry about getting in trouble or anything. He must have seen how Izuku reacted to his actions. Oh, okay. So, can you tell me what happened tonight, maybe a little bit earlier? This was going to be tricky. Should Izuku lie about doing vigilante work? Did it even really count as vigilante work? And did he even want to talk about what happened? Not really, but he didn't exactly have a choice. Well, I was getting in some exercise and… You were roof hopping, weren't you? Eraser interrupted from across the room and Izuku glared at him slightly. Anyway, so I was roof hopping and then I heard a disturbance and decided to check it out. Is this a frequent activity you do? Roof hopping, I mean. Over the past couple of months, I've been working on my speed and coordination. Kinda true, but not the whole truth. The detective hummed as he wrote something in his notebook. And what happened when you went to check out the disturbance? Oh, nothing really. Tsukachi and Eraserhead looked at each other, thinking the same thing. Eraserhead had to clean up after Serpentine and reported about 4 different takedowns of different criminals in the same area. Right, and have you done that before? Done what? Gotten involved in a fight or something of the sort? The detective looked up at Izuku sharply as if to dare him to lie. The boy rubbed the back of his neck and looked away, maybe a few times. More writing, and Eraserhead decided to come and join the conversation, not taking his eyes off of Izuku, who noticed just how different he was reacting to his stare. Just a week ago he would have crumbled at the thought of making him angry, but now he just couldn't find it in himself to care. Interesting. And what about tonight? Tell us what exactly happened when you jumped. Izuku really didn't want to do this. He was already in a crappy mood and felt like he could sleep for the next century. So being questioned on his decision to kill himself didn't sound very pleasing at the moment, or ever. You know, I had some downtime and thought I might as well just. Instead of finishing his sentence, the boy just made a face and left the rest for the two of them to figure out. So, it was just a spur-of-the-moment decision. Not really. Well, guess there was no avoiding this. I had decided earlier that I was going to. I just didn't know exactly when. That's a very big decision. Do you think it was the right one? The detective looked at him with sad eyes, while Eraser just continued to stare and analyze his words and expressions. Again, Izuku shrugged, which resulted in Eraserhead scoffing and getting elbowed in the ribs by Tsukachi. I mean, sure, the first time was a big deal, but I kinda figured it wouldn't work again. I was just testing it really. Testing ... if you could die. Yes, hold on, Eraser spoke up, not looking happy. But to be fair, he never really did. You keep on saying last time, so this wasn't your first attempt. Izuku shook his head, feeling uncomfortable with the expression the hero now wore. It was one he hadn't seen yet on him, but was all too familiar with. Kid, don't. Izuku got off of the stool and began to walk towards the door. I really need to be getting home, and I'd rather not have this conversation with you guys. So Eraser, I'll see you later. And Detective. Honestly, he hoped that he would never see him again, but he couldn't just say that, so he simply nodded to him and left, leaving the two of them speechless for the second time that night. What have we gotten ourselves into, Tsuki? I blame you. Oh, whatever. Eraser rolled his eyes and shoved his friend, who began laughing despite the somber mood. Just like the kid had said, Eraser did see him soon after that night. He didn't see him the day after, but he couldn't really fault him. Dying had to be traumatic, not to mention it being an attempted suicide. The thought of the kid, who was always so bright-eyed, feeling like that was the only option, made Shouta nauseous. He had been there. He had dwelt with those thoughts and feelings, especially after that happened, but he had people to help pull him out of that place. From what he got from the kid, he didn't have that. So Shouta would just have to be that until he did. Seeing the kid's fluffy hair fly in the wind as he jumped from building to building felt like a breath of fresh air. Finding the kid dead like that ... it had hurt, and Shouta didn't want to find him like that ever again. When he finally caught up and the two of them started talking and joking like before, something felt off. Serpentine wasn't stuttering or getting flustered by Eraser's presence, which was a good thing, but it makes him wonder why the sudden change. It was as if his whole attitude changed. He seemed more confident, not as afraid or insecure. He would sass Eraser and joke around and wouldn't flinch at his glare or immediately apologize for being a burden or annoying. All things that needed to be fixed, but why was it so different now? Shouta wanted to ask with every fiber of his being, but he knew if he did, the kid would just run away, and he didn't want to lose him again. Not even for a second. Oh God, I really am a dad, aren't I? Wow, you're so amazing, Kaken. I hope that when I get my quirk it's as cool as yours. You're going to be the best hero, and I'll always be there right beside you. Katsuki woke up feeling the streams of tears on his cheeks immediately. Every morning it was like this. Ever since the nerd ... he's been having the same kind of dreams that were centered around his childhood friend. Some were just sad, like tonight, reminders of how good and pure the boy was before everything. But some nights Katsuki wasn't so lucky. For a solid month after the accident, the only dream he had was of him jumping. He would see the things leading up to it, and every time he closed his eyes all he saw was Izuku broken and lifeless. After a while he stopped waking up screaming and just resorted to silently sobbing most nights. The thoughts haunted him constantly. Just shut up, Deku. No one wants to be friends with a useless loser like you. You'll never be as good as me, Deku. It's just not possible with how pathetic you are. You're nothing and always will be. Why don't you just do all of us a favor and take the swan dive so that we don't have to deal with your shit anymore? Why? Why did I have to say that to him? Why did I have to be such a dick and destroy the one good thing in my life? I really am pathetic, sitting here feeling sorry for myself when Izuku's dead. And it's my fault. Katsuki knew that it was nowhere near time to get up yet, but if he went back to sleep then he'd just have the same dreams or nightmares. So, he decided to go ahead and get up and take a shower so that he wasn't so gross and sweaty. The water was cold, but not too much so he didn't want to catch a cold. Not with the UA entrance exams being so close. That's also something that changed after everything. Katsuki refuses to take anything but cold showers or eat or drink anything that's hot. His quirk relies on the sweat that his body produces, and so he decided that he just wouldn't sweat. It wasn't working out too well for him so far, but he just couldn't bring himself to use his quirk unless it was absolutely necessary. It just brought back memories of him tormenting and abusing Izuku, and he got enough of that in his head. He didn't need any more reminders. Once he was finished in the shower, he started working on some of his schoolwork. He was already way ahead of everyone else because that was one of the things he turned to when he thought too much. It helped distract him, at least for a bit. He decided that he was still going to try to be a hero, but he didn't have to be the best anymore. It was that ambition that drove him to treat everyone around him like dirt, and Katsuki didn't want to be that person anymore. He wanted to be someone that Izuku could be proud of. He wanted to be the Kaken that he always saw despite everything. Katsuki was going to do better. It wasn't going to make up for the past, and he wasn't trying to. He just couldn't be that way. He wouldn't. He refused to be someone who tore people down and drove them to kill themselves. He wanted to be better. He wanted to be like Izuku, someone soft and kind and light and good. Katsuki wasn't good. He might never be able to be, but that didn't mean that he couldn't try. For Izuku, Katsuki, you better make it in. Mitsuki called as her son tried his best to get through the living room as quietly as possible. The boy cursed under his breath and turned to where his mother was peeking her head out of the kitchen. Yeah, Mom, of course I'll make it in. I am the best after all. The words were empty. They held absolutely no conviction or truth in them. Katsuki knew he wasn't the best and he wasn't trying to be anymore. But he knew that if he admitted that to his mom, then she'd have a meltdown. For as long as he can remember, it's always been about winning, about being the best, about cutting down those beneath you and working your way to the top. Right when Katsuki got his quirk was when it really got bad. He had always been scolded and compared to Izuku by his mother. She would yell about how he was such a screw-up and that he was horrible because he wasn't as nice or polite as the other boy. And then when it was announced that Izuku was quirkless, anytime the Midoriyas were brought up, it was always how it was such a tragedy that their son was a failure. And how sorry she felt for Inko because she had to deal with the humiliation of giving birth and raising someone so weak. He was just a kid. They were both just kids who had big dreams, but completely different destinies. That's what I want to hear. Now go and show all of those extras who's going to be number one. Yes, ma'am. Katsuki was thankful for the short conversation. When his dad wasn't around, their interaction tended to be a bit more intense without him as a buffer for her. Katsuki didn't know if he knew about everything, about what Mom would always say, but he had never been one to speak up anyway, so it didn't really matter. He had to take the bus to get to UA. It was a quiet ride and Katsuki found himself people watching, looking at each face and trying to figure out what their quirks might be and if they had ever been hurt because of them. It was a habit he had picked up from Izuku. When they were younger, he would always analyze everyone around him, and as much as Katsuki didn't want it to, it rubbed off on him. He was thankful for it now, though, because it helped him see just how much of a dick he and the people he hung out with were. The place was humongous. Yeah, UA was supposed to be the best and most prestigious hero school in the country, but wow, it was actually very intimidating. Past Katsuki would have just scoffed and taken it as a challenge to be better and live up to the school, but things were different now. It was an honor for him to be here. After all, not everyone could be. The written exam was a breeze. Guess all those early mornings studying instead of sleeping really paid off. And after President Mike was finished with introducing them and explaining how the physical exam was going to work, the room was split into two groups that went to their respective exam sites. Katsuki was surprised by how easily he recognized some of the pro heroes that were around. Another thing he picked up from Izuku, he supposed. Alright, so the objective of the physical exam was to destroy as many robots as possible and rack up the most points. It seemed easy enough, but Katsuki cringed at the thought of using his quirk so much and around so many people who could get caught in the middle of it. Oh wow, that's definitely different. If only Mom could hear his thoughts, she'd probably explode with anger. A loud buzzer sounded, and President Mike's voice announced the start of the exam. It was chaos. People were destroying bots left and right, and Katsuki was beginning to get overwhelmed. No, focus. You have to pass. Do it for Izuku. For Izuku. Right. It was almost child's play taking down the robots. The biggest obstacle was actually controlling the blasts and trying his best to protect everyone around him. Shrapnel had left multiple cuts and bruises on Katsuki's arms that were exposed by his tank top. But at least it was him and not the other kids. They didn't need to be hurt by his quirk even if it wasn't directly. He couldn't do that anymore. He lost count of how many times an oblivious participant thanked him once they figured out what had happened. But that really didn't matter. He wasn't looking for praise. He just didn't want to hurt anyone. Ever again. The exam was almost over when a loud siren was blowing out Katsuki's eardrums and making it hard for him to stay on his feet. No one knew what was going on, but he suspected that it had something to do with those 0-pointers that President Mike warned them about. He said to avoid them. All right, easy enough. Oh, never mind. Robots that were taller than the buildings in the fake city rounded the corner and began to make the ground shake as they moved towards them. I feel like that's a lot more than just an insignificant robot that we should avoid. What? Are they trying to kill us? The examines around Katsuki began to run away in terror, some screaming and some managing to keep their cool while looking at the 5-story tall death robots that were coming right at them. Running seemed like a good idea. Actually, probably the only idea that didn't end up with him steamrolled on the ground. Katsuki started running while still looking back at the 0-pointers, actually looking to see if anyone was still near them, when he heard someone scream for help. He searched around for who could have called out and quickly found where a girl looked to be trapped under some rubble that fell when one of the robots ran into a building. And the robots were about to run her over. UA wouldn't let that happen, right? They wouldn't let an innocent girl get injured over something like an exam. But this was a hero school, and they were supposed to be training to deal with real villains who would be trying to kill them. There's no telling what the school might do to prepare them for a life as dangerous as being a hero. Oh hell, without a second thought, Katsuki was off towards the trapped girl as people around him yelled at him to stop and to run back. Did they not see that she needed help? Maybe they did. It didn't look like any of them were going to try to help her. Guess it was up to him then. Hey, you're good. You're good. You're going to be fine. Can you move? The girl tried to wiggle out from under the rubble but stopped when she knew that she wouldn't be able to. No, and my quirk is at its limit. What's your quirk? 0 gravity. I can take away the gravity of anything that I touch with all 5 fingers. Katsuki tried to lift one of the larger pieces of building off of her but was unsuccessful. Okay, now what? What would Izuku do? He looked at the approaching robots and guessed that it'd be maybe 10 seconds until they were right on top of them. Okay. He looked around for something that he could maybe use as a lever to help lift the rubble. Nothing, just a bunch of rocks and pipes. Katsuki found a pipe that looked sturdy enough and ran back to where the girl was. Okay, I need you to try and help me. I know that you're at your limit, but please just try to help lift this. She nodded, determination filling her expression as she took a deep breath in, and the two nodded at each other. The girl touched the piece of rubble with both of her hands, and Katsuki got the pipe under it and began to push down on the other side. Slowly the chunk began to lift, and the boy found himself smiling while the girl looked like she was about to throw up, but kept on pushing. Come on, calm me on. Just a little bit more, yes. Now, move now. The girl quickly pulled herself out from under the chunk of building and rolled on her back as Katsuki finally dropped it and let out a breath. I can't believe that actually worked. Oh no. The girl looked above Katsuki and gasped sharply. What? Oh right, the robots. Kinda forgot about those. Katsuki got to his feet and groaned as he wrung out his hands. This was going to hurt. You're always too hard on these children. I know that they're trying to be heroes, but honestly, this one almost got crushed and this one badly damaged his wrists due to overusing his quirk. If he's not careful, then he could face serious consequences for doing so. Not to mention the hearing damage that I had to repair. Shout aside as he listened to Recovery Girl scold him yet again. And it wasn't even his fault this time. Hearing and sight are tricky to work with, I know. You've told me this before. Multiple times actually. He mumbled the last part under his breath and earned a glare from the woman. Absolutely right. Maybe try switching things up this year, huh, Racer? Let's have a bet to see how long your class can go without a visit to see me. You know that I refuse to gamble with you. Besides ... you'd win. Recovery Girl's mouth pulled into a smirk as she went back to treat the two examinees who got the most injured this year, Katsuki Bakugo and Ochako Uraraka. As much as Shouta hated to admit it, she was right. The students, especially the Hero Corps students, tended to spend more time in the infirmary than they did out of it, and that was a problem. Of course, that was simple a part of being a hero. Hero work is dangerous and should not be treated as any less. But maybe something he would really focus on this year is self-preservation. God knows they all need it. ... And it might just so happen that he's still shaken up by what happened with Serpentine and is going to take it out on his official problem children. Speaking of which, what was he going to do with these two? What if they actually ended up in his class and he had to deal with them and whatever it was that happened today? Shouta didn't want to think about it. He had monitored the exam with the rest of the teachers, and it was safe to say that these two made quite the impression on everyone. No one expected the kid with the explosion quirk to be so gentle and protective of those around him. He actively blocked them from any possible debris or such that his explosions might throw around. It was interesting. And absolutely no surprise that he got the highest amount of rescue points even before the 0-pointers showed up. Uraraka was a surprise as well. Just looking at her, you'd never expect the girl to be so tough and determined. But she tore through the exam while still being kind to those around her and helping when she could. If Shouta didn't know any better, he might say that he had hope for this year's litter of applicants. If the rest of the kids in his class were like these two, then this year was sure to be an interesting one. As he continued to think about some of the other applicants and his future class, his mind couldn't help but wander to Serpentine. He didn't actually know how old the kid was, but he was young, right around the age of the rest of the students here actually. Shouta wondered if the kid would do well in this exam. It was geared more towards physical quirks, and from what he witnessed the other night, he thought that it was safe to say that his quirk wasn't the offensive type. Maybe that was why he was so against getting his license when Shouta brought it up. Being unkillable wasn't a very flashy quirk, and kids don't usually praise that sort of thing. Deeper and deeper his thoughts went, and he found himself wondering if the kid had ever been bullied, and that was why he seemed so meek when they first met. It would make sense, but then why had he 180'd so suddenly? The possibility of Serpentine being bullied in the past makes Shouta angry for some reason. It was irrational. He barely knew the kid. So then why was he being so protective? Why don't you just admit that you're a dad and go see your child? Sukachi loved to tease him with that kind of thing, but Eraser didn't agree. He wasn't a dad. He was a teacher and an underground pro hero, neither of which he acted very happy doing. He was supposed to be the cold-hearted and strict teacher and then mysterious hero. What about that was parental? Sure, he cared for the kid to a degree, but that didn't make him a father. Right? Ugh. Shouta hated thinking about this because it always confused him, and he didn't like not being in the know. He pushed all of it to the back of his mind and cordoned it off in hopes that he wouldn't have to deal with it again anytime soon. But that was probably too tall of an order when he was friends with Tsukachi. Maybe he should get better friends. No, it was hard enough to get the ones he had, and beggars can't be choosers. He would never admit it, but Shouta was thankful for the people in his life and wouldn't trade them for the world. But he couldn't ruin his reputation by saying something like that. Izuku's mood was a little bit more irritable than usual, and it was very obvious. He didn't mean to be, but he had been a little bit more rough with the guys he had taken down tonight. It was hilarious when he realized what had happened, what he had done, and immediately began to apologize profusely to the criminal who was tied up on the ground just barely conscious. He knew exactly why he was in a bad mood. Izuku decided to head out just a bit earlier than usual today so that he could grab dinner when he caught glimpse of Kaken walking home. Bakugo was quiet and somber-looking as he made his way to their apartment building, looking a bit worse for wear. He had bandages all up his arms, and one of them was in a sling, and he also had a few more injuries around his body that looked almost healed. Izuku wondered what could have happened, until he remembered what today was. The UA entrance exam. He must have been just getting back. What must he have done to get those injuries? And he didn't look happy, so was it possible that Katsuki Bakugo actually failed? No, that was impossible. Everyone knew that Kaken was going to be a hero, the best hero. But was that really the case? Izuku realized just how messed up his behavior had been all of these years, and he knew that that wasn't how a hero was supposed to act. Heroes protected people, they lifted them up and encouraged them. Although that doesn't really mean much when not even Izuku's favorite heroes had done that for him. Regardless, Katsuki was no hero, at least in attitude. I wonder what the exam was like. It was probably hard, given that UA is the most prestigious hero school there was. But even so, it's hard to believe that Kaken might not have passed. Even as kids, Katsuki had always been the best. Not because of his quirk, or because he was smart, but because he worked to be the best. He trained his quirk until he mastered as much as he could at such a young age, and he studied like crazy until he was the top student in their grade. Sure, he was benefited by the quirk he was born with, but he could have the coolest quirk in the world, and it wouldn't matter unless you worked to hone and master it. And quirks aren't everything. Izuku knows that better than anybody. Even as kids, Kaken's ambition was like no one else's. Izuku wondered if in some alternate universe they might be taking the exam together, working side by side to be number one, motivating one another and pushing each other to be the best that they could be. Maybe in that universe his mother might still be alive and Izuku wouldn't be so alone. Stop it. It's pointless to dream about things that will never happen. That was why Izuku was in a mood, and Eraserhead noticed it as soon as he saw him. What's that face for? I have no idea what you're talking about. Izuku answered blankly, not looking at Eraser. The two of them were on a roof and Izuku was sitting on the edge with his legs dangling off the side. He pretended to not see the look in the hero's eyes when he saw him so close to the edge. Even though it had been weeks since the incident, it was still a bit tense between the two of them and Izuku hated it. Eraser was trying to pretend that everything was fine and back to normal. But Izuku knew just how freaked out he was when he found him dead. He didn't know why, but that's just how it was apparently. And it probably didn't help that Izuku's attitude had changed after he woke up. The hero had commented on it a few times and even had asked about it only to be cut off by Izuku leaving or changing the subject. He really didn't feel like going into his tragic past and such, so Eraser would just have to deal with it. Alright then, the hero came to sit beside Izuku. We can talk about something else. Oh yeah, he thought for a moment. The UA entrance exam was today. Did you know that? Izuku's face fell before it completely shut down. That wasn't supposed to happen, but Izuku couldn't help it. UA was the last thing he wanted to talk about right now. They could talk about literally anything else. Next, Eraserhead's eyes turned worried, before he schooled his face and hummed as he thought of another topic. What about ... Oh, you like heroes, right? Did you see what All Might did earlier today? Pretty amazing for a daylight hero. I could never be in the spotlight like that. He scoffed as he finished his thought and didn't seem to notice that this conversation wasn't any better. No, next. Alright then, why don't you tell me a bit about your life? Absolutely not. You know, you're really bad at this. Izuku looked at Eraser from the corner of his eyes and smirked slightly, feeling comfortable to show expressions again. The hero just groaned and flopped on his back with his hands over his face. I know, Owa. I'm trying. Okay. You don't exactly make it easy. Yeah, I guess you're right. He seemed to be trying so hard, but why? What did he get from this? Izuku was just some random kid who happened to be outed as a vigilante and he witnessed that. It wasn't like he was obligated to be around him anymore. Izuku could handle himself fairly well now, with all of the training the two of them would do. Why are you doing this? The blunt question caught Eraser off guard, and the hero just stared at him for a few seconds before sitting up and staring at Izuku. What do you mean? Izuku gave the hero a look and gestured to himself like it was the most obvious thing in the world. This. Being around me, looking after me. It's not like you have to or anything, so why are you doing this? The hero hummed for a moment. That's a good question. Tell you what? An answer for an answer. I don't like that. Izuku grimaced as his mind immediately went over all of the possibly detrimental questions Eraser could ask. Well then I guess you'll never know. Oh, that was not fair. Eraser, you sly little. Izuku continued to glare at the hero, who just shot back a smirk and quirked brow, until he sighed and slumped his shoulders. Fine. What do you want to know? This was a terrible idea. Maybe the worst possible thing he could have agreed to. There were so many questions Eraser could ask that Izuku just wouldn't be able to answer. But would he let him dodge? He should have just walked away and told the hero that he'd see him tomorrow. So why hadn't he? Perhaps it was Izuku's disregard for his life and anything that had to do with it, but he knew that he couldn't die yet, so why would he risk making things harder for himself? Did he actually like Eraserhead? Sure, the hero had been around for a while and had helped Izuku out, but that didn't mean that they were friends, right? Would that even be the right thing? Eraser could probably be well not his dad, but still. Was it weird to be friends with someone almost twice your age? Was the answer so important? Yes. The entirety of Izuku's life there was only one adult who truly cared for him, and here this man was. Grumpy and homeless looking after him just because. There was nothing that he could gain from it, so why was Eraser there? Why did he care? Izuku needed to know, and he was willing to give answers to get it. Well, Izuku's voice seemed to bring the hero out of his train of thought. Alright, first question, how old are you? Ugh, why was Eraser like this? I just turned 15. Izuku hated this already. He didn't want to give out any more information about himself than was necessary. What if him and Saavaage figured out that he was dead and orphaned? What would they do? Maybe throw him in another orphanage? Put him in the system? No, that wasn't going to happen. Izuku wouldn't let it. Eraserhead seemed surprised by his answer, but not as much so as he thought that he would be. To be fair, Izuku didn't exactly look old, so it wasn't that big of a stretch. Okay, my turn. Why did you stick around after you first met me? Izuku wasn't going to beat around the bush. He had questions that he wanted answered, and he wanted to get his done and over with. It took the hero a minute to answer, but when he did, Izuku thought he saw the smallest trace of a smile. You intrigued me. What does that even mean? It's my turn now. Now he was actually smirking at a scowling Izuku, who huffed and crossed his little arms. Are you in school? This was a trick question, and they both knew it. Izuku had to accept that it wouldn't take Eraser and Saavaage too long to figure out that he was Izuku Midoriya, because there weren't too many dead kids that looked like he did. It was kind of a relief. Izuku's inner monologue was like 75% death jokes, and he thought that Eraserhead might enjoy them, so he was glad that he was able to take that filter off of himself while he was around him. It was also just nice to not have to pretend or keep as many secrets. Kinda hard to be in school when you're dead. The hero's face was difficult to read. His expression was tired as always, but there seemed to be an extra bit of seriously added and the hint of a smile that he was forcing down. It was hilarious. Alright, that's fair. What do you mean by I intrigued you? I saw a kid jumping across rooftops and face plant. That's pretty interesting. Izuku's eyes squinted as he looked at the nonchalant hero. He thought that this was a game. Can you be serious, please? That sounds like another question. Eraserhead. The hero's smirk dropped at the tone of Izuku's voice, and he cleared his throat. I don't actually know. You were just some random kid that I just so happened to meet, so why was it so important that I see you? Why did it scare me so much to think that you were out fighting criminals and risking your life with no experience? Well, I guess that worrying was kind of pointless considering that you can't die, but still. That was actually more than I expected to get out of him. Your turn. What exactly is your quirk? Izuku's brows furrowed. I don't have his mouth slammed shut before he could finish his sentence. That wasn't true anymore. What, you don't have a quirk? Kid, we both know that that's a lie. All emotion trickled out of Izuku as if a bathtub was being drained. Anytime the topic of quirks had been brought up when he was younger, he had the same reaction. A beating or bullying usually followed quirk-related conversations, so Izuku shut down as a way to protect himself. It seems that the habit was still active. It didn't help that Izuku wasn't too happy with the cards that he had been dealt. How ironic was it that all of his life, he had been bullied and looked down on because he didn't have a quirk, and then when he was ready to leave, when he was finally going to have some peace, he figures out that his quirk makes it so that he can't die. The one thing that he wants to do above anything else. How was that fair? Izuku looked Eraserhead directly in the eyes, feeling absolutely nothing. I don't have a quirk. I have a curse. It took a second for Izuku to come back to himself. All the while Shouta just stared at the kid in shock. A million thoughts running through his mind. The kid wants to die that badly. that he would go as far as to say that his quirk was a curse. It hurt. It hurt so bad to hear him say that. To watch someone so young with so much potential be so devoid of life and feelings in regard to himself. It was terrifying. With that type of attitude, what was stopping him from snapping and deciding that society had screwed him over so completely? Why not do the same to it? The kid could absolutely do it too, which was what was so terrifying. They were walking a thin line. And if Serpentine crossed it, Shouta didn't know if he'd be able to stop him. So then ... why hadn't he turned? From what little he knew, the kid had been through more than enough to justify it. And especially with how he's been acting recently, it's weird that he's still on their side per se. He was still a vigilante and was still fighting illegally, but he was doing it to help people. Why? Shouta wanted to ask so badly, but he knew that if he did, he wouldn't get a real answer. What he was getting now was a miracle in of itself. He needed to dig just below the surface, coasting just below the line to keep the kid from running. What is your and the detective's relationship? The question caught Shouta off guard. You mean Saavaage? He nodded. He's one of those friends I mentioned. We've worked together ever since I graduated, and he's become one of my best friends. Why do you ask? Is that your question? Oh, he was good. The little turd no. The racer scowled for a moment, before deciding what to ask next. What about your family? Not too deep. All right, Eraser, getting personal, are we? This was dangerous territory. You're going to have to be more specific. Do you have any? Izuku swallowed the vial that crept up his throat. I have had a mom. He knew as soon as he said it that he had said too much. Why did he have to correct himself? This opened up too many doors for possible questions that Izuku did not want to answer. Ugh, he was such an idiot. Did something happen to her? Wait, maybe he was digging too deep. Pass. Eraser shot a look at Izuku that he refused to meet. He just kept on staring forward and hoped that the hero would take the hint and drop it. Alright ... what about your dad? Back off a bit, Shouta, don't drive him away. Izuku kept staring forward, the wind ruffling his hair enough that a small strand came out from his bun and he had to tuck it behind his ear. Never knew him. I see. The hero followed Izuku's gaze and switched his sitting position. That must be hard. Next question. Do you know who I am? Izuku was tired of this conversation. He needed to end it, but there were still a few things he needed to know first, and he might not get another change to ask. Eraser sighed loudly and let out a half of a sad laugh. We tried. Went through the entire system looking for green hair and green-eyed kids in Japan and came up with nothing. Although now that some other things are known, it might be a bit easier to narrow it down. He paused before he looked at Izuku again. You're dead, aren't you? Izuku gave the hero a really look and gestured to his very much alive body. You know what I mean. Officially you're dead. That's why we couldn't find you, because we were looking for kids who were still considered alive. The two of them let that realization sink in. Izuku was honestly surprised that it took him this long to figure that out, but sometimes people were oblivious to things that they didn't want to see. Eraser was the one to finally break the silence. Does anyone know that you're still alive? I mean, Izuku took a breath, determining whether or not to answer the question honestly or just avoid it. But he knew that if he did, that would be the answer in of itself, so might as well tell the truth. Nope, just you and Tsuki. I'm sorry. I don't want an apology. He didn't mean for it to come out as cold as it did. And from the way that Eraser flinched, he knew that it was probably worse than he thought. What did he expect? These were touchy subjects and Izuku wasn't exactly an open person. He didn't even mean to say this much, but there was nothing he could do about it now. I think I'm going to go home. See you later, Eraser. Without even waiting for the hero's response, Izuku left. He kept replaying their conversation in his head as he made his way back, and every time he did, he regretted it more and more. He didn't need this. He didn't need whatever this was with Eraser. What he needed was to be gone, and that was something that obviously wasn't going to happen on its own anytime soon. So maybe it was time for Izuku to get creative. Ugh, why won't I freaking die already? Izuku's voice echoed throughout the empty apartment as he tried to calm his breaths that were big and loud. He was at his limit. He had tried every trick in the book, from blood loss to suffocation to gunshot through the head. Nothing had worked. He just kept on coming back again, and he was pissed. Every time he went under, as he called it, it was something. Sometimes it would be Katsuki. Sometimes he would have to relive his childhood. One time he had to go through the loss of his mother all over again. There was no rhyme or reason to what he saw when he was gone. One time he had even seen what his life might look like if none of this had ever happened. He came back in tears after that one. Actually, he found himself waking up in tears more often than not. Izuku had refused to cry while he was conscious, but those feelings had to be dwelt with one way or another, and apparently his psyche had decided that it would punish him through his dreams and when he was dead. One thing that did come out of all of this, though, was that Izuku was starting to understand his quirk better now. The time between when he died and when he came back differed, and that made him think that he might eventually be able to control how long it took him to come back. He had a theory that right now his mind had a lot to do with what he saw and how long he was out for, but if he learned to control that, he also found out that he came back pretty much unscathed. The only thing that indicated that he died at all were the scars. It seemed that every time he received a fatal injury, that injury healed along with the rest of his body, but it scared for some reason. Maybe it was a mental thing. Dying wasn't exactly easy, so it wasn't too far of a stretch. But whenever he saw Eraserhead, he would have to try to hide and come up with creative explanations as to why he had been getting so many new scars. The hardest one by far was the bullet hole scar, but that one was on either sides of his head and could be covered with his hair if he styled it a certain way. The only thing was that the hair over the two little scars stopped growing, so it was noticeable if you looked hard enough. But he doubted that people's first thought would be a bullet scar, so he wasn't too worried. He did have a few scars on his wrists from when he bled out, and he really didn't like them, but that was before he knew he would start developing scars from what he died from. It's hard to scar from falling from a building, so it wasn't apparent until he died from something visible on his body. It was kind of annoying, but Izuku wasn't one to give up, although he was on the verge of at least taking a break. For one, he was tired, like exponentially tired, and it got worse every time he died. That was another theory he had, that his body healed itself kinda like how Recovery Girl's quirk healed others, by using their stamina. And the other reason was that he was running out of ideas on how to die. There was only so much you can do when you live alone in an abandoned apartment with limited money and resources. It might be a good idea to take a break and decompress. At least he wouldn't have to deal with his mind until he went to sleep. So that meant that he needed a distraction, and what better distraction was there than illegally beating up criminals? It seemed like it was the same old song and dance recently. Shadow would meet up with Serpentine on patrols, they would talk and bicker. He would try to learn more about the kid. He would shut down and leave, then repeat. This routine was getting on his nerves, which was saying something because he was usually a patient person, or more patient at least. Maybe it was the stress of having a new class to teach. Sure, Shadow had been doing this for years and it had gotten easier, but it was still not easy. Children never are. They're all different personalities, ways of learning, ways of dealing with different situations, backgrounds, and pasts. There was no instruction manual he could read to be a better teacher. You really had to play it by ear and adjust to each student's individual needs as much as you could while still being fair and consecutive with every other student. Like he had said, hard, but rewarding despite what most believed he thought. It was frustrating because he couldn't treat Serpentine like his students. He didn't even know the kid, and yet he had somehow weaseled his way into Shadow's life and mind and didn't have hope of getting out anytime soon. That was where Eraser's mind was as he patrolled with the kid. When he saw him, he had to refrain from grimacing. The face mask covered most of Serpentine's face, but it didn't hide the dark circles under his eyes or the tired look that dominated his entire expression. He reminded him of himself ... and that wasn't something that Shadow was happy about. Something had happened. A person doesn't just go from tired to walking zombie within a few days. I mean, they could, but there was something else going on. Eraser had been worried when he didn't see the kid for 2 days, and the sigh of relief that he had when he finally found him tonight was not surprising. He couldn't deny it anymore. He worried about the kid. He knew that technically he would be okay, that he couldn't be hurt that badly because he'd come back, but still. Shadow had come close to death more times than he could count, and none of those experiences were fun ones. They had all taken something from him and burned themselves into his mind forever. Almost dying was scaring ... and he couldn't imagine what actually dying must be like. The number of emotional wounds and scars this kid must have ... was terrifying. Not only that, but he wanted to die. What all did he go through for him to give up like that? Shadow didn't know if he wanted to know the answer to that question. He found the kid sitting on top of 2 criminals that were unconscious, humming to himself. That seemed to be a habit of his, one that Eraser found endearing. The hero walked towards the kid and sighed, making his presence known. You look like crap. Hello to you too, Eraser. It's been a few days. What, were you catching up on your beauty sleep? We both know that you need that more than I do. His answer was quick and it surprised Shadow slightly. The kid was getting better at this whole sarcastic devil-may-care thing. He looked at the 2 unconscious criminals, checking what their injuries were so that he could write the report. Ugh, he really hated paperwork. You know, I should start making you fill out the paperwork for the criminals you take down. Then maybe you'd be a bit more sympathetic and give me a break every once in a while. Serpentine scoffed and hopped off of the criminal pile. Haha, yeah ... you're funny, Eraserhead. It was worth a shot. Shadow shrugged and leaned his back on one of the alley walls. So, how have you been? Staying out of trouble, I hope. The kid gave him a look that was clear as day. Oh, come on, you know me better than that. Unfortunately, it's been whatever. I'm still alive, so there's that. You know, it's not healthy for someone, especially someone your age, to want to die so badly. I never claimed to be healthy, just alive. The kid's smirk grew as he looked at Shadow. And I don't know if you're one to talk about being healthy. When's the last time you took a shower? Or slept? Eraser squinted his eyes at the kid. I'll have you know that I shower regularly. Right? Serpentine turned on his heel and began to walk out of the alley. That's why you look homeless all of the time. Uncomfortable, comfortably greasy. And the kid bolted, knowing that if he stayed any longer, he'd end up in Eraserhead's capture weapon. Oh, I know that look. You saw your son tonight. He's not my son. Tsukachi laughed as he followed Eraserhead through the station and grabbed a packet of paperwork for his friend. Keep telling yourself that, Shouta. Maybe if you say it enough, you'll start to actually believe it. Eraser whipped his head around and glared at the detective with his quirk adding an extra edge of intimidation. You know that you don't scare me. Suki taunted with a grin. You're the worst. Shouta stomped around the corner, leaving Tsukachi to wait for him to get back. That's why you love me, he called out, drawing a few officers' attention to their exchange. No, I don't, Shouta yelled back with no real menace. Shinso wasn't having a great day. The kids in his class weren't like the ones he had before, but he still felt like an outsider. It was partially his fault. Putting up a front of not wanting to talk to anyone and scaring them off before they approached him wasn't exactly how he expected to make friends, but at least it kept him from getting hurt. He wasn't looking forward to going home either. He knew that as soon as he walked through the front door he would be reprimanded by his foster parents. It had been 3 years now that he had been with them, and they treated him with every bit of contempt as the day they took him in. They set up rules. Shinso couldn't speak or make most noises without getting yelled at. Every time he walked into a room he was met with fearful stares and suspicious eyes. Even his foster siblings didn't like him. It sucked, but that was just his life. And at least he wasn't in an abusive home anymore, well, physically at least. And he was used to it by now. It barely even got to him anymore. His classmates didn't treat him any different. It was hard to be the quiet kid in class with the villain quirk. It made him a target, one that they knew wouldn't be able to fight back because it would just prove their point. That's why he was so surprised to be even mildly accepted at UA. His classmates didn't shun him or cower away. They avoided him, sure, but really was his own doing. He was sure that if he gave them the chance, they'd talk to him. He might even make some friends. Not that he'd ever let that happen. Even though most of his classmates left him alone, there was always a few. They weren't even from his class, but they somehow found out about his quirk and made some comments as he left the building. That was why he was in such a mood. He left school later than usual today, and so he was walking home later. Even just a tiny time difference, and the streets were completely different. There were more people, most of them going home from work as it was just after 5. Shinso didn't live in the best part of town. He had seen a lot more criminal takedowns by that new vigilante on the news around the area. He didn't understand how someone could do that. People saw vigilantes as borderline villains, so why would they put themselves in that place? He supposed that some of them didn't have the best intentions, but he knew that some just wanted to help people just like him. So then why didn't they try to get their licenses and help people legally? Maybe they had. Maybe they were like Shinso and got the short end of the stick and this was their only option. What if he ended up like that? Itoshi shook his head. No, you're going to be a hero, and you're going to use your quirk to help people. You're going to prove all of them wrong, prove to them that you can be a hero. It was a nice dream, but would it actually come true? Stop it, Itoshi. You can be a hero. No, he had worked to get where he was, and he was going to go even further. He had to. He took a shortcut through a long alleyway to get to his house. It was one that he took every day and didn't think anything of it being later in the day. That was until he heard footsteps behind him and his mind screeched to a halt. Hey, kid, where are you going in such a rush? A rough voice called out from behind him. Shinso paid him no mind and just kept walking, hoping that he would get out of this unscathed. But of course, life never really was on his side, was it? The footsteps got louder, and the voice got colder. I said, where are you going? Keep walking, ... just keep walking. Maybe he'll go away. Crap. The guy rounded in front of Shinso, stopping him in his tracks. He was huge, at least twice his size, and he looked mean. His quirk looked intimidating too, some kind of crab hand quirk or something. All he knew was that it would hurt like hell to be caught in his pinchers. It's rude to ignore people when they're talking to you. You know, 1 second the crab guy was leaning over Shinso, looking ready to kill him. And the next a blur of black and green dropped from the sky with a yelp and landed on the guy, sending him crumpling to the ground. Oh, shiitake mushrooms. I really didn't mean to do that. The figure stood up and nudged the guy with his bright red shoes and groaned when he didn't move. He then bent down to check his pulse and breathed a sigh of relief that Shinso took as a sign that he didn't kill him. He was small, the guy who dropped from the sky, maybe around his own age, but smaller than usual, and he was dressed head to ankle in black. The only thing that was even remotely noticeable about him was his bright green eyes and curly green hair pulled back into a bun. Oh, Shinso thought, this was that new vigilante, the one he was just thinking about. Maybe he was summoned by Shinso's thoughts. The vigilante stood up and looked at Shinso, as if just noticing him. Oh, hi. Sorry about that. I wasn't planning on falling on the guy like that. I just missed my footing on the roof, and he just so happened to be there. I hope that he's not a friend of yours or anything. Believe me, he's not. Okay, good. I should probably call Eraser and have him take care of this. He seemed to go off on a little mumbled rant before he came back to reality and glanced at Shinso again. Are you okay? Heard it all. Shinso blinked. This was really weird. No. Great. The vigilante pulled out a phone and dialed someone's number on it. Hey Eraser, I got some fresh criminal for you in an alley here. Eraser. ... is in Eraserhead. Serpentine. How did you get my number? The voice on the other end asked. The volume on the phone turned all the way up so Shinso could hear the conversation even though it wasn't on speaker. The vigilante scoffed and nudged the crabman with his foot again. Your lack of faith in me is hurtful. It's not lack of faith, it's me wondering how you got my number. Do you even have a phone? Duh, what teenager doesn't have a phone? A dead one. I'm sorry, a what? Touché. Anyway, you better come pick this punk up before he wakes up. When I dropped in, he didn't seem too friendly. Was that a pun? There was a long groan on the other line followed by some muffled conversation that Shinso couldn't quite make out. I'll be there in 5. Send me the location. You got it. And don't go anywhere. No promises. The vigilante replied back in sing-song. Another sigh and then the call ended. What just happened? Well, he should be here soon. While we wait for him, the vigilante thrust out his hand to Shinso. I'm Serpentine. I'm aware. Shinso shook it wearily, as if it might hurt him if he made any sudden movements. Thanks ... for taking down that guy. The vigilante looked down at the still unconscious thug. What? Him? Oh, that was a complete accident, but I'm glad that I could help. Why was he bothering you anyway? Who knows? It's nothing new though. The purple-haired kid that looked almost as tired as Izuku did answered with his hands in his pockets and refusing to meet his eyes. He looked around his age, and he was scrawny, kinda scary looking with the shadows falling on his face the way they did. But to Izuku he just looked cool. What's that mean? Shinso looked at the vigilante. He hadn't expected for him to continue the conversation. That was the perfect opportunity for him to stop talking, so why didn't he? It didn't make sense. Nothing, don't worry about it. And you don't have to talk to me, you know. Izuku plopped down beside the unconscious criminal and patted the ground next to him. Come sit. He stretched out his short legs and began to fidget with one of the hair ties on his wrist. Talk to me. What did you mean that it wasn't anything new? Itoshi complied to the vigilante's request hesitantly. Was he really about to have a heart-to-heart with Serpentine? Really? Well, it wasn't like he had anywhere to be anyway. And he definitely didn't want to go home. No, it's nothing, just he met the vigilante's green eyes that seemed to be tearing into his soul and gave up trying to dodge. He somehow knew that even if he did, he wouldn't get very far. I get bullied sometimes. Izuku hummed under his face mask. He knew all about that. Why? My quirk. They say that it's a villain's quirk and that I can never be a hero with a quirk like that. It really sucks because I've wanted to be a hero ever since I was little, and I even took the entrance exam for the hero course at UA. But I didn't pass because my quirk wasn't physically powerful enough. And I bet that gave them even more to say. Yeah, Shinso scoffed, thinking back to how bad the bullying had gotten just before he graduated middle school. He would come home with black eyes and bruises all over, and his foster parents just completely ignored it. His foster dad even went as far to say that he deserved it one night at dinner. But it's been getting better lately. And what does your family think about this? Crap. Hitoshi didn't exactly want to talk about his family issues with some random stranger, ever if he was up-and-coming vigilante. He barely knew the guy. Oh, they're fine. Serpentine looked at Hitoshi out of the side of his eyes, and he knew that his lie wasn't as good as he wanted it to be. He tried again. This home is a lot better than my last one. They don't hit me and they provide everything that I need. That sounds like basic human decency to me. Did they even try to stop the bullying? What was this? Why was he so interested in Hitoshi's life? Not exactly ... but it's okay. It's not their fault that I have such a villainous quirk. I'm just glad that they took me in and continue to take care of me. So, you're a foster kid. It wasn't really something he liked talking about. Remembering that his parents apparently didn't love him enough to keep him and just dumped him at the door of the closest orphanage wasn't exactly a happy memory. He had been through 6 different homes before this one, all of which condemned him for his quirk and got rid of him as soon as they possibly could. This home was the longest one he had ever had. The couple that fostered him had 3 other foster children that they took care of. They were nice enough, but they were of course wary of him and what he could do. So, they took some precautions in the house. Hitoshi was not allowed to speak while at home. The whole family took up sign language classes so that they'd be able to communicate with him, and he had a designated notebook he was to talk with at school since he technically wasn't supposed to talk there either. But he didn't really use it. They made sure that everyone he was around knew of his quirk and exactly how it worked so that they could be prepared and take their own precautions. And Hitoshi was usually secluded in his room except for mealtimes and other special occasions. It was to ensure their safety from him. Sure, it was unnecessary, and yeah, it hurt, but if it made them feel better, then he'd deal with it. He'd be out of the house soon anyway, and then they wouldn't have to deal with him anymore. Something that they did when they first took him in was forcing him to attend weekly classes on how to be a good citizen. They'd make him watch villain rehabilitation videos and lectures on how to properly help people, things to try to teach the villain out of him. Once Hitoshi told them his desire to be a hero, they eased up on the classes and videos. They probably assumed that if he wanted to be a hero, then he didn't want to be a villain, and therefore they didn't have to deal with those anymore. Like he said, they really were nice people who had taken him in and kept him longer than anyone else. They did slip up and yell or say something mean to him every once in a while, but they tried their best to keep things civil between them, which he appreciated. Are they good? Serpentine's voice pulled Hitoshi out of his head and he hummed questioningly. Your foster parents, are they good people? Were his foster parents good people? They took him in, so they must be, right? I think so, yeah. The vigilante nodded, staring at nothing in particular. Brain working a million miles a minute, no doubt. Do they love you? It came out of nowhere, and probably shouldn't have caught Shinso as off guard as it did. But the question hung in the air as he looked at the vigilante, who was now searching his eyes for an answer. Hitoshi didn't know how to answer the question. He didn't really know what love felt like. All he had ever had was tolerance at best. Was what his foster parents did for him love. He read about love in books and saw it on TV, but it looked different there. According to them, love was self-sacrificing. Love was putting someone else first and doing everything you can to be there for them and be with them. Love was encouraging one another and listening to them when they needed you to. It's seeing the worst part of them and staying anyways. That wasn't what Hitoshi had, and he didn't think he ever has. No, I don't think they do. People who love you express that love, whether it be in telling you verbally or showing it through their actions. That's not what his foster parents did. Hitoshi felt a drop of liquid on his hand that was resting in his lap. What? Is it raining? He looked up to see that the alley was covered above them, and then he felt another drop run down his cheek. He lifted a hand up to his face to find that he was crying. Oh wow, he scrambled to his feet and retreated to the alley wall to wipe his face and pull himself together. I can't believe I let myself cry in front of a vigilante. The vigilante. How pathetic can you get? It's all right. A low voice sounded quietly behind him. Hitoshi turned around to see Serpentine looking at him with sad eyes, ones that were very different from before. It's okay to cry, sometimes, when you need to. What? This was too much for Shinso. Bottling up your emotions like that isn't healthy and will just hurt you in the long run. Believe me, I would know. He got up and stretched as he continued on. Crying doesn't make you weak. It proves that you're strong enough to care. Hitoshi tried, but the words failed to form as he stared at the sad-eyed vigilante in next to him. The weight of his words ... They held so much feeling, so much anguish. It made him sad. He had never been much of a vigilante sympathizer. In his eyes, they were one step away from villainy, and that was one step too close. But as he sat here with Serpentine, someone who was as human as he was, who had feelings like he did, he had to reconsider. What had he been through to elicit such pain in his expression? What's your name? The sudden question drew Hitoshi from his thoughts once again. The mood had shifted, as if that entire conversation hadn't just happened. And the vigilante looked at him with an expectant raised eyebrow. Shinso. Hitoshi Shinso. Good. It'd be pretty awkward for us to exchange tragic backstories and not even know each other's names. Hitoshi's eyebrows furrowed. But I don't know your name. Well duh, Serpentine scoffed. That's kinda the whole idea. He started but was cut off by cloth shooting from the mouth of the alley and wrapping Serpentine up like a burrito. Both boys turned to where the cloth came from and found a red-eyed Eraserhead glaring at them, or Serpentine mostly. This is a bit overkill, don't you think, Eraser? When it comes to you, nothing is enough. Okay, that's fair. The underground hero released the vigilante from his scarf and walked towards them, taking in the scene. All the while, Hitoshi was fangirling in silence at his all-time favorite hero showing up, and he was here standing in front of him. Stop. Keep your cool, Hitoshi. He's just a hero. Just the coolest hero ever. The hero walked closer to them and examined the still unconscious thug on the ground. He looked up after he determined that he was still alive. You did this? He asked Serpentine with tired eyes. The vigilante just nodded and the hero sighed deeply. Well, he's not dead, so there's that. Hey now, we both know I've never killed anyone. I'm the one who wants to die, remember? Another sigh. How could I forget? He then seemed to take Hitoshi into account and looked him over. He nodded his head towards Shinso and asked, He with you? No, I found him. Oh my god. I slipped off of the roof and landed on that criminal who was threatening him. I saved his life, and then we talked about our tragic backstories. And we both know you have plenty of that. Eraserhead rolled his eyes and brought his hands up to his temple to rub as if fighting an oncoming headache. Are you hurt? He asked Hitoshi, who was still staring wide-eyed at the interaction in front of him. Any emotional trauma? Well, any that wasn't caused by this one. He jabbed his thumb at Serpentine. who smiled innocently under his mask and, Hitoshi was just noticing, was somehow free from Eraserhead's capture weapon. Hitoshi shook his head, still not able to calm himself down enough to function like a proper human being. Pull it together, Hitoshi. Okay, I'm going to need both of you to come to the station with me to give statements. Before he even finished his sentence, his scarf shot out and wrapped Serpentine up once again, who had looked like he was trying to run away. Not so fast. You need to learn to deal with the consequences of your own actions, and that means paperwork. But I don't want... The vigilante whined while Eraserhead dragged him out of the alley with the criminal draped over his other shoulder and motioned for Hitoshi to come too. I don't care. You fight, you right, that's how it goes. Serpentine groaned and pouted as he continued to be dragged the entire way to the police station. Suki, Eraserhead dragged Serpentine through the station doors as if it was just another Tuesday, and the vigilante hadn't stopped grumbling until he saw one of the detectives who, when he saw him, seemed to age 10 years. Serpentine. He took in the situation and rubbed his forehead before turning to Eraserhead. Dang, looks like I owe you $20. At this, the underground hero smirked and yanked Serpentine to his feet. The vigilante looked between the two of them with a look of betrayal in his eyes. Have you two been betting on me? Yes, both answered at the same time and chuckled. I was hoping that you'd take a bit longer to bring in, but it seems that Eraser has stepped up his game. I don't know about that. If he really wanted to get away, I have no doubt that he could. He probably just wanted to see you again and annoy the two of us as much as possible. That's not true, Serpentine cried out with a scoff. I also wanted to spend more time with my new friend. He gestured at Hitoshi with his head. Eraserhead sighed and the detective laughed. An interesting dynamic if Shinso had ever seen one. I feel sorry for you if Serpentine now considers you his friend. He patted Hitoshi's shoulder and then the two of them turned and started walking through the station, still dragging the vigilante behind him and carrying the criminal on his shoulder. The hero dropped the criminal off in an interrogation room and made sure that he was restrained for when he eventually woke up, while Hitoshi, the detective, and a burritoed Serpentine waited in the hallway. Geez, what did you do to knock that guy out so cold? The detective nudged the vigilante's shoulder. It was an accident, he cried. The detective scoffed and crossed his arms. Of course it was. He looked over at Hitoshi, who was awkwardly just going along with whatever happened because he had absolutely no idea what to do in this situation. He must have picked up on his discomfort because he stretched out his hand in front of Serpentine, who stood in between the two of them. I'm Detective Tsukachi, and you must be the new friend that Serpentine was talking about, right? Hitoshi let out a nervous laugh and accepted the detective's outstretched hand. Apparently so. My name is Hitoshi Shinso. It's very nice to meet you, Shinso. Eraserhead finally came out of the interrogation room with a sigh. You really did a number on him, kid. I didn't mean to.